All right.
Yeah.
This is it. 100 episode. Tilly Drysdale in the flesh. Everyone's been looking forward to having you on the show. You're not so excited. So...
No, I am excited.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I'm a podcast virgin, so
Wow.
this is all very new to me.
What an amateur. 2020 and you haven't even done a podcast.
I know. I need to get with the times.
Okay. How you feeling?
Yeah, okay.
You excited?
Yeah, I'm excited to find out all these things I've been wanting to know
I
about
know,
you.
it's such a mystery. Who am I?
The enigma of Phil Drysdale.
So we decided we are going to do another podcast later on. But initially,
We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, we'll see how this one goes. Initially, this podcast is going to be my story, my journey, my deconstruction. A lot of people have asked me to share my deconstruction. And so we thought, well, this is like a pretty soft entry, right? Because you're just going to be kind of chatting with me as I tell people my journey, asking questions, prompting me. We've got some good questions people have submitted. We've got some really shit questions that people submitted as well. We're probably going to skip those. So yeah, that's kind of what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And we're going to dive into it as well because it's Christmas and we don't really want to be recording a podcast as much as we're excited to record a podcast. We want to be...
We've got a lot to do.
Chilling out.
Our plans have had to change last minute, so yeah, we've got a lot of food to buy and
yeah, exactly, yeah.
house to clean and everything. So yeah. But it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good.
Maybe we should drag the podcast out a bit. Actually, if it's cleaning and shopping are my alternates, I'll just do this.
Yeah.
Awesome. How do we start? Where do we go?
Okay, so
there's a lot of blank at the top of that page.
Yeah, there's a lot. We've done like a timeline of like your life and nothing.
No one cares early on.
Pre-Bethel, but I think
maybe
we should just, some people might be interested to know kind of how did you grow up? Did you grow up Christian? Do you want to talk about that to start with?
Sure. Okay. So I grew up pastor's kid, in a first generation pastor's kid kind of home. Like it's like both my parents had just kind of become Christians not that long before they had me. My mom became a Christian like late teens, and she was quite a wild Christian. She was like out partying, and then instead of going home that night, she was literally going from like parties to church to teach Sunday school as like a 17-year-old, 18-year-old girl. So she was like tiptoeing in Christianity. She liked Christianity, but she was still figuring out what that looked for her. She certainly wouldn't have ticked a lot of boxes for today's evangelical Christians. And then she got more serious as time went on. I met my dad, who was a crazy, wild, alcoholic sailor who got saved because he got healed of a stomach ulcer in a Christian meeting he got dragged to, and like immediately was like, well, I guess this is legit. And so he like went all in and became a pastor. And then I came along, but they never really like were like intense in like forcing Christianity on me. I had to go to church, but like more than anything, I think that was just a child safety thing. You couldn't leave me alone anywhere. I always started fires in the house, and like literally, I started fires in the house. I was not a child to leave at home alone. If like Home Alone had been me, Kevin McAllister would have been dead long before the burglars got there. They'd have got to the house and he'd be dead, like because like I don't know,
blew himself up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like he was playing with the firecrackers and blew his arm off and then bled to death or something. That would have been the plot for Home Alone if it was me.
Yeah.
So that's why I was at church more than like my parents being like, you have to go to church. They were never very like they were very open about what they believed. They were very clear about what they believed, and they certainly did the part of teaching me what they believed. And as a kid growing up in a Christian home, I'm sure everyone can, not everyone, but a lot of people listen to this, like, are able to identify with, oh, of course, like, you just kind of accept the culture you're in, the world you're in, the parents are like, they're the right people, right? They know everything. Mom and dad know everything. So if they're telling me about God, surely they're right. And so I just kind of was in that ecosystem. I didn't really care about it much, but I just kind of was like, yeah, okay, there's a God, and like he does this and he answers prayer and we go to church and that's the way it works. But it was never very relevant to me because it was all old people. Like, and I know like when you're like 10, 12, 15, everyone is old, right? They were probably like in their 40s or something. But some of the churches we were a part of were like legitimately very, very old people. Like it was just like a dying church.
So what, like,
60s.
do you want to say like what denominations they were?
Sure. So they were Baptist. My dad was a Baptist pastor, but Baptist means a very different thing across the world than it does in America. It doesn't actually. Baptist means a very diverse thing in America.
Yeah.
But most people, when they hear Baptist, think of a very specific type of Baptist in America. They're thinking of like Southern Baptist, that kind of, and they're very rigid, you know, very black and white, very fundamental. But Baptists actually were kind of like the wild childs of their day. They actually, the Baptist movement became the Baptist movement because they felt that churches around them were becoming too fundamental and were placing the Bible above God. And they were like, well, it doesn't really matter what the Bible says. It matters what God says. And we use God to interpret the Bible. And that's why actually globally, a lot of Baptist churches believe quite a lot of different things.
Did Baptists come from like Catholics? Like, did they divert from that, would you say? Or
I mean, ultimately, because all Protestants come from Catholics.
Yeah.
But they would have been an emerging movement from the Catholic Church became the Protestant Church, and then you have all these different movements start filtering out. I don't remember where the Baptists came from. Probably, I'd imagine, maybe not, could have come from the Anabaptists, because that was a very early movement where they believed you should be baptized as an adult.
Yeah.
And so a lot of them were like, well, Anabaptists, but baptize again. So
Right.
they were like, oh no, like, it doesn't matter if you're baptized as a child, you need to get baptized again. Which
Yeah.
sounds pretty Baptist, right? You were a part of
Yeah.
Baptist church for
Yeah,
a while,
yeah,
right? Yeah. And so, but my point in that was my dad was a charismatic Pentecostal Baptist pastor. My mum was very charismatic. And so when I'm saying Baptist, I'm not talking Southern Baptist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is not your typical Southern Baptist church
Yeah.
in the heartland of Texas
Yeah.
or something. This is a weird kind of quasi mix for what most Americans would associate with Baptist and charismatic.
It's interesting that like your parents, having come from these like kind of wild lives. Well, I don't know if you would say wild,
Well,
but
yeah.
like
Based on by default Christian perspective, it were
for
wild.
them to then to be like converts. It's interesting that they weren't like too strict with you, because I think quite often we do see that people do become very black and white and I don't know, quite rigid maybe in their faith in those early days.
It's interesting because they were very, very black and white in their own faith, how they saw things. My dad was so black and white, and I know he'll be watching this or listening to this at some point. But he was really, really black and white, very rigid. When we had my podcast with my brother Neil and his wife Jessie, me and Neil were joking about some of the moments in our upbringing with dads where he was so like, this is the way. And since then, he's kind of like come back and gone, sorry guys, that's a bit extreme. It's probably not the way, you know, like, and we all grow and we all change and we all develop, especially as we age, right? And I mean, how many people I talk to that are like, I so regret bringing my kids up this way or this. And I don't even think like there's need for my dad to regret how he brought us up, you know, so it wasn't even like a bad extreme. It was just, he was passionate about what he believed. But yeah, it intrigues me. I'd love to talk to him. Maybe I should have my dad on a podcast.
That would be
and
really
like,
interesting.
why weren't you so like fundamental in how we had to live our lives? Like, that was just never it was never a thing. Like even I joked about it with my podcast with Neil, but when my dad had the sex talk with me, I must have been like 15, 16, and like it was the most amazing, awkward, weird dynamic. But me and my dad never really, as a kids, when I was a kid, my dad was an adult at this point. We never like had this deep connection of like strong conversation.
Sorry, I need to sneeze.
You can sneeze, just sneeze. It's all good.
No, I can't like choose to sneeze.
Go on, come on, sneeze now.
No, I do everything I can.
But you know, we never were like, you know, like heart to heart. And I think a lot of people our generation with their dads, that's a very common thing. Or you know, a lot of the last generation weren't taught to be emotional, to
Especially
connect.
from the UK as well.
Yeah, very like kind of reserved, shut down in a lot of ways. But yeah, my dad, one day I was leaving the house, just walking out the back door, and I don't know why he had this conversation, because I was going to like hang out with one of my only friends who was definitely males and I was definitely straight, which my dad would have known based on the amount of times he'd walked in on me watching things on the computer or whatever. But he just goes, Phil, he's like, you know what sex is, right? He's asking a 15, 16-year-old this. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, you know to use a condom, right? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, do you want to talk about this more? And I'm like, no. And that was the whole conversation. It was super cringe. I think I died on the way to my friends, like just like dying inside the whole way. But that was it. That's our entire conversation about sex until maybe like, I don't know, when I got married or something. Maybe we talked about it since then, or and so like, but I think of that as far as like how a lot of people that I'm working with now, and a lot of and even how I then ended up influencing people when I was a youth leader, and the conversations I had with youth and stuff, that we kind of hammered down, okay, here's the boundaries, guys. And it wasn't, you know, to use a condom, right? Dad had like basically just gone, look, if you're going to do this, at least do it safely, which to be honest with you was, was very progressive of him in a lot of ways, and I'm very thankful for that. It's maybe one less layer of shame of the like 5,000 story layer shame cake that I have of sex. But yeah, it didn't come from that component at least. But yeah, they just weren't very fundamental in how they brought us up.
And like, you know, I remember you've told me before about your mum and how she always encouraged you to kind of think for yourself and kind of come to your own conclusions. Yeah,
no, she early on kind of instilled in me I should question when people tell me something is a certain way, I should question it. She even told me to do that with her, which is, again, very progressive of her, you know, because most of us don't want our kids questioning us.
Yeah.
Like, not many parents like that dynamic, you know. And I've had arguments with my parents when I question them, and they like bounce back and they get like maybe a bit defensive, and I get defensive when people question me. Like, we all do that. But to tell a young child, hey, look, people are going to have different opinions in your life, and you need to think about it. You need to process it. You need to work that out for yourself, and you need to challenge it. Like, I've recently just started doing the Enneagram, and apparently I'm an 8, which is often like the challenging one. It's the one that challenges and
so
stands up and pushes against. So I'm not super into Enneagram. People listen into the Enneagram going, you just butchered that one sentence probably. But that is very much my nature. And I think that was instilled in me from like a very young age. I think my mum probably regretted it as well, because it probably made me much harder to raise.
Challenging.
I know you regret that at times. But yeah, so I think by default, I was always questioning Christianity as I grew as well. So on one level, I accept, I'm like, oh, this is kind of the world. This is how it works. You know, my parents talk about demons and, oh, cool, there's demons. That's how it works. But on another level, I was always questioning whenever I did see a gap, whenever I did go, that doesn't make much sense though. And so there were things that just didn't make sense to me. The fact that it was all older people my age didn't go to church. And the people that were my age that went to church were dragged there by their parents.
Yeah.
Like, there was no one my age that was excited to be at church. And it was only when we moved to Aberdeen in Scotland when I was about 16. And I was really excited because at 16 I was allowed to not go to church anymore, because they figured I probably wouldn't burn the house down. Idiots, I definitely would have burned the house down still. And I was really excited, but my mum was like, well, why don't you just give this church a go? Because my dad had stepped down from being a pastor and started a new job. And it meant that he could pick any church. Because before, obviously, you don't get to pick your church if you're a pastor. You're just put in a church. And so he picked this church with 100 youth. I mean, the church was only about like 50 or 60 people at the time. You know, like it was... But this youth group had this mass of people. So the youth was
separate to the main service kind of thing,
and they were like, why don't you just go along to this? And suddenly I was like, whoa, there's a lot of youth here. And they're all like excited about Jesus. They're talking about Christianity. They're saying the things my parents say. But you know, when it's like your parents say things, you're like, yeah, okay, but that's my parents. No one accepts what their parents say is like, you know, like, especially when you're a teenager, right? At that point, you're starting to rebel. You're starting to push back. And so it just suddenly like became a lot more interesting to me. And I actually started to become very fundamental about my faith, really very serious. I would go to Bible studies multiple times a week. I rapidly became a youth leader very early on. I was always involved, always engaged, was going to church, got involved in helping in the church. And then actually, I then moved churches because I think part of that was my ego. A part of it, I think, is there's got to be this disconnect from your parents' faith to your own faith.
Yeah.
And I think that was really important for me. So a part of it was that, but also part of it was I wanted a more serious church.
Whoa.
And this church was pretty serious.
What kind of church was it that you were at?
It was a Baptist church, but it was actually an international church. Because Aberdeen's a very like was a very international oil kind of culture. And so it was actually way less charismatic, much more kind of conservative. They still had charismatics go along, but like you wouldn't want to be too open about that. You certainly wouldn't see people praying for healing, things like that. And so it was a lot more reserved. And so even still, I was like, no, these people aren't taking the Bible as seriously as I would like. They're not like, you know, all in. And so I actually transitioned to another church that was Brethren, or it was ex-Brethren. But ex-Brethren just meant they didn't want to pay the denomination fees, I think.
Did they still have to like, you know, did women still have to wear hats? And
women still had to wear hats in all services apart from the family service.
Okay.
So there was one service a day, because it was a big church. For UK, it was a very big church, about 600 people. Massive church. At the time, and very wealthy church, like very well-to-do church, very like posh and fancy, certainly from coming from my background, which was very poor, I was like, whoa, I feel like a fish out of like water. But yeah, it was very serious. So yeah, women didn't just have to wear hats. Women had to sit on one side of the church,
Wow.
and men sat on the other side in one of the services, which was the most traditional service.
Was it like the women weren't allowed to speak as well?
Correct.
Yeah.
So in that traditional early service, it was led by the congregation. So there was a pastor up front, and he might give a message or something, but the congregation, so basically someone would stand up and they would say, hymn number 212, and then everyone would turn to 212, and the pianist or the organist or whatever they were doing was like frantically just turning, right? Because you're like, you talk about like how many like worship practices people have. This person just flew. I guess it's easier if it's just you don't have to gel with anyone, because you're not allowed any musical instruments in this, just an organ, because that's what they played in the Bible times. I don't know how that works. But yeah, so then they would do that, and then someone would get up and just read a Bible verse. It was always men on the men's side. Women weren't allowed. And I do remember there was one time actually a woman got up, because I guess she was visiting. She didn't understand. She was probably like a bit like, what is happening? I don't even know. I mean, she might have even been sitting with the guys. Wow. I don't know. I don't remember. I've got a you know this. I have a terrible memory for anything visual and trying to pull out the visual components of this. But I remember this woman got up, and it was a big thing, and it was like elders meetings and whatever over like some new person that just didn't know the rules.
What did people do when she stood up?
A gasp, like
okay,
like audibly, like what do we do? I think maybe her husband got up and like just basically said what she said or something, and it kind of made it okay, or like you know, she suggested a hymn and he suggested it after her or something. It was like a rapid like, or maybe like a deacon or something got up and said the same hymn, or I don't know how it went, but it kind of like it was like everyone was shocked, but it was quickly like kind of dealt with, you know. And I think that's something that churches do pretty well at, is like, how do we quickly cover our shame? Because there's almost a thing of like, while everyone's embarrassed for her, there's almost this like revealing, you should be a little bit ashamed as well here, because this isn't like no other culture. All these people in business are working with women. They probably have women bosses and stuff. All these people, when they go home, their wives probably pull the strings in a lot of areas and run certain areas of the life, you know, like that they have, or, you know, maybe they're in charge of finances, or maybe they like mostly run like the child rearing, or there's different things. Maybe they are the one that works and the husband says, oh, probably not at the Brethren Church. But, you know, that dynamic was on display, and yet suddenly for it to come into this place, it kind of reveals there's something not quite right with what we're doing here. I think on some level we engage with that today. It's hard not to. Yeah. And we don't like that. We want to push that away quickly rather than come to terms with the way we see Scripture, the way we see the Bible, the way we see church. It was a big deal. The family service was big because like they had like drums eventually. Initially it was big because they had a guitar as well as the organist. So, you know, it was like they did not deal with change well. But I liked it because they loved the Bible. They taught the Bible really well. They really dove into it. They did exposition. I became really close to the teaching pastor, who like kind of took me under his wing, and he gave me books to read. He would teach me how to read the Bible. Like he would teach me about you know, doing exegesis and exegetical work. Like that was really big for me because I was serious about Christianity, and serious about Christianity meant you got serious about the Bible.
Absolutely. So what was your like? What did you think of all the less progressive? You know, the kind of the women being treated differently, all that kind of stuff. Maybe the using an organ instead of other instruments. Did you take issue with that at all, or did you think, oh, well, that's biblical? Or
it's really hard. I'm trying to remember, and I think a lot of it was just kind of like this like world of cognitive dissonance. Like, I don't think I overly cared. So there was a thing of me dismissing it as going, oh, well, that's the really traditional service. But there are ways to read the Bible where women can speak. There are ways to read the Bible where we can have not an organ. Like, I don't even understand the organ bit. Like, how does that work as the only instrument? Like, so for me, I was like, well, obviously, this other service we're running is biblical. It's fine. Okay. But I don't think I looked at it and went, this is some really backward shit. This is harmful. This is really not doing a service to a lot of people. This is really harming women's self-worth and value or whatever. You know, I mean, there's lots of people suffered, not just women, but, you know, that's an obvious example in that early service. because there is a thing of like, you're unclean, go sit on the other side. The men sit on one side, you sit on another side because you are a distraction. You are, well, I don't even remember the reasons for that, but like, it's like, you might distract them with your beautiful curly hair, or maybe a wrist will show under your, like, who knows?
Yeah.
But that's harmful stuff.
Yeah.
But that was not on my level. In the same way that, if I'm honest, at that time, I would have been sexist, I would have been racist, I would have been a whole host of different things. Not that I would have fought that. If you'd said you're sexist, I would, no,
Sure.
I love women. I think women should be able to work and should do this. And so it was not explicit, but I 100% had bought into the systems of racism, sexism, things like that. And I think it's the same thing there, where I couldn't see the systemic implicit damage. And so I would never have overly.
And maybe it didn't affect you as well, so you were less aware of it.
I was a white, cis, het, male. I was running my own business at this point. Like, I was very privileged. Yeah. And everyone loved me, and it was great. And I was a leader in the youth group at this place, and so I really didn't suffer any. In any way, shape, or form, really, in this kind of system. And so there was very little reason to ask questions. But I did ask questions at that church a lot, because as much as I loved how they did the Bible, as much as I loved other things, I'd grown up in a charismatic home, and I'd seen charismatic stuff. I'd seen people being healed. I'd seen miraculous answers to prayer. I'd heard my mom give prophecies and it come true. And so I was asking questions about that, because that's in your Bible, right? If you're going to take the Bible seriously, it's there. And then the whole thing of like, well, it stopped when the Bible came. And I was like, that's a weak argument. Like, it's a really, any way you cut it. And this was a really serious, fundamental Bible reader. I was still going, that's pretty weak. That's not a good argument.
Yeah, so I guess at this point you'd already kind of seen like there's different interpretations, and like, so I guess would you say that you kind of just switched from, I have one interpretation to now I've changed it, or to more like an openness of like, I'm seeing that maybe it's not black and white? And
no, it was still black and white.
They're still black and white?
100%. They were just wrong, and I was right.
Okay.
And if I just would continue to pursue, I would find the right.
Yeah,
And so even, so this is funny, but around the time of me getting a bit frustrated with this, I chose to leave the church. I spoke to the pastor, and I was like, look, I just don't think I'm growing anymore here. And we still stayed close, and he still gave me books to read, and asked me for my thoughts on books, and would talk to me about it and help me. And he was very much discipling me in a lot of ways that for me at the time were really positive and helpful. I can't look on that time and think of it being in any way toxic, which is a great thing. I'm sure many people could look at it and critique it and find some toxic components, because that's always going to come in at some point in any relationship. But so I chose to leave the church, and I actually had another friend at the church, and we chose to leave together, and we were like, we'll go and try out other churches. But our big thing was, we want them to be serious about the Bible, but we really want them to be somewhat open to charismatic stuff. And so we basically wrote down all the churches that we'd heard of that in the city that were charismatic. You're gonna love this. We made a spreadsheet.
Of course you did.
I think it was like 10 columns, and it was like worship, prayer, Bible, like healing, and it was just all these different things, like people, like relationships, like it was all these different things. The pastor, because you rate the pastor out of 10. We rated them all out of 10, and it would have an overall score. And it was amazing. I wish I tried to find this actually recently, because it was in a Google spreadsheet, so it might be somewhere if I look back far enough.
So was this from visiting, and then
we'd go and visit these churches, and we'd at the end we'd go for lunch, and we'd score them. We'd like go, all right, let's fill in the spreadsheet.
Did you give them like some feedback of like, so this is?
We didn't. But I was intense. So this gives you an idea how intense I was.
Yeah.
We went to this church, and on that day, visiting the church, I'd say, I want to meet you this week, to the pastor. I'm like, I'm looking for a new church. I'm serious. I'm not hanging around. I'm not messing around. But I want to talk to you. I've got questions for you. I don't want to go to a church for 6 months and realize, that you're not what I'm looking for. Yeah. And so then I'd meet with these pastors, and it's kind of funny. They must have been quite excited.
And you're what, like 17 or something?
No, this would have been about 20, I think, at this point. So about 20, maybe even 21.
They probably loved it.
They would have loved it, right? Yeah. How excited would most pastors be if a passionate 21-year-old that knows the Bible, that's a youth leader, says, I'm coming to your church, I want to know what it's about, and then they start going, what do you believe about this? What do you believe about that? Is there room for me to grow here? Will I be able to lead in some capacity? What's your progression? Like, what's your model of leadership? Like, really, like, intense. But this is why I laugh when people are like, oh, you obviously weren't ever a Christian. I'm like, gosh, I've been like every type of Christian, like, and all of them intense. And so, yeah, but over time we started to try different churches, and in that time I kind of settled for one. We kind of basically made a compromise because there wasn't anything that really ticked all our boxes. But we were like,
what? There wasn't the perfect church?
This is an okay church. And for me at this point, I'd realized what the perfect church was.
Bethel.
Right? Because Bethel were charismatic and they did take the Bible seriously. At least from afar, it seemed that they did. But as far as my tick boxes and all I was looking for, I was like, yeah, this is a great church. And it was a great church. And so I was feeding off of their material and I was really being encouraged. I was growing a lot. It was changing me in amazing ways. And I saw amazing miracles in my life. Like I really saw some incredible things that I don't have a natural answer for. To this day, I'm like, I don't know. I really don't know. I was healed of a very severe illness that I had my whole life. I grew up with Crohn's disease, which is a very serious illness. Like people have huge chunks of their insides taken out and replaced with bags. You know what I mean? Like it's very serious.
So was that before you went to Bethel that you had?
That was from I'd had issues from about the age of 12 and they only really diagnosed it about 16.
No, I mean the healing.
And the healing was probably about 23. And between those ages, I probably spent 2, 3, 4 hours on the floor in the fetal position in pain every day on average. Some days much more, some days a bit less. But I was in severe pain for like over a decade.
But that was, it was post-Bethel that you had the healing?
It was pre-Bethel.
Pre-Bethel.
So
it was pre-Bethel.
It was a couple of, about a month before I went to Bethel, I went to this big Florida revival called Lakeland Revival. Lakeland Revival? I think it was Lakeland Revival. It was like Todd Bentley. He was this like crazy biker who, and there's all sorts of twists and turns. He ended up having an affair with his assistant and like left his wife. And so everyone was like, oh, it wasn't really real. And I'm like, well, whatever it was, I went there ill and I've not been ill since. And I've occasionally had like a flare up where I don't feel so great or whatever. But I went from feeling chronically ill every day of my life to going, oh, I'm fine. And I can eat whatever I want and I can do whatever I want.
Yeah,
that's some crazy
Crohn's
stuff.
isn't something that people just like recover from. It's
There
like a
isn't
lifelong
recovery
condition,
plan.
isn't it?
And doctors say that to me, like it's still on my records, and they're like, "Oh, so you have Crohn's disease?" And I'm like, "Yeah," and I don't know what to say to them. I'm just like, "Oh, it's just under control. Like it just doesn't bother me anymore." And they're like, oh, "Okay, so you got a very specific diet?" I'm like, "Mostly just meat and junk food," but yeah. So yeah, and maybe it's still potentially there.
You still, I mean, you
my
don't eat vegetables still.
Fiber is you're supposed to avoid fiber if you've got Crohn's, and I think that is a big component. Even if it's psychological, it's a hangover of like, don't touch that stuff; it'll make you ill. Which became really fun when I was traveling all the time. But anyway, we're
digressing.
What are we talking about? Okay, so then I went to Bethel. So Bethel was intense.
Now hang on.
Okay,
right. I remember a while, like probably when we first met, you told me about this experience you had where maybe you made it up. I don't know.
No.
No, you told me about like I think it was before you went to Bethel. Maybe did you say you read Bill Johnson's book?
Yeah.
And then that was like a huge moment for you.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I read Bill Johnson's When Heaven Invades Earth.
Yeah.
Which if you're, I'm assuming most people listen to this are not, but if you're a evangelical fundamental and you're interested in charismatic Christianity, it will be your jam. Like it's amazing. It's very inspirational. People being healed of amazing things. And I'm reading this and I'm going, this is it. Like this is the stuff. Like my parents have tasted of this over the years. I've seen some of this occasionally in some charismatic meetings, but I have never come across like an environment that he's talking about where it's just like normal. Everyone's seeing healing constantly. And I was like, I've got to go to Bethel. What's funny is I didn't pick up from the book, which is quite clear in the book, but I didn't obviously pick up that they had like a school of ministry that you could join and do. And I was like, I need to go to Bethel.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do. And eventually I after Googling a bunch, I was like, oh, they've got a school. And so my mom was like, are you an idiot? Like it says they have a school like multiple times. And then I was like, I thought that was like small children, like kids. Because we don't really call like, things a school. Like we wouldn't call like something for adults
you
a
call it
school
like a
or
course
something.
or something, wouldn't you?
So in the UK that was a weird language. So for me, I was like, when he was talking about people from the school healing, this is probably why it was even more amazing.
Like 5-year-old.
I'm actually a 5-year-old going, sir, can I heal you? I feel like you've got a carcinoma. I'm like, wow, that's a smart 5-year-old. So I was just like, this is amazing stuff. It's just, it blew my mind. And I felt God tell me, I want you to quit your job. So I ran my own business at this time. And so I quit. I gave my shares back to my partners, walked away with nothing. And they did really well out of that long term, and not as a thing of like, I resent that or anything, but like the point being like, I could have stayed in that job and done well. Like I could have been I mean, they sold the business. They made a lot of money. They became IT directors at a big company, you know, and they're now doing all sorts of amazing stuff. Like, I could have had a different career path, and yet there was something about me going, no, I don't want to be doing this. I need to do this Bethel thing. I need to be serious about this. And I felt I should quit my job. I felt I shouldn't work, so I didn't work for a year as I was preparing to go to Bethel. I got accepted. You had to have 10 grand in the bank to go to Bethel.
Wow.
The visa requirements were they wouldn't let you have a visa to America, because they're saying you're coming to America for a year and you're going to live here for a year, but the requirements are you're not allowed to work. We're not letting you in. I got in with like nothing. I had zero in the bank.
Wow.
And they were like, and I was panicking at the visa, like at the embassy, and they just like stamped me in, went through. It still took like 4 hours, but I stamped, I got through, ended up at Bethel with no money at all. And all of this was just consistently like very miraculous things. I'd have a bill for $50 come in the post, and then I'd have like my friend that day go, "Hey, here's $50. Like, you know, like, I just feel like I should give you that." And you're like, "Oh, cool." And that stuff happened all the way up leading to Bethel, happened all the way through Bethel, constantly very what many Christians would call a miraculous provision. I don't know what I call it today. I would still consider it quite amazing. Because it wasn't just things like even going to Lakeland, the place I got healed. I really wanted to go, but I had no money, and I'm going to Bethel, spending money on a flight to Florida from the UK in summer. That's an expensive flight. And so I said, there's no way I'm going to do that. And then a friend of mine was like, "Oh, I found a chartered flight that has spare seats, and they're selling them cheap for £283.16. I still remember the amount. Because I was like, well, that's still 208, you know, that's still much more than what I have. I got home, and I had a email from a family friend I hadn't talked to since I was 8. And he said, "Hey, I've got this amount I need to give you. I've been watching the God channel. I want to send you money." And he sent me the money, and it was just the right amount for this flight. And you're like, I don't know what I do with that stuff. Like, fast forwarding to today, I'm like, that's mind blowing to me. What is that? Is there some quantum mechanics? Is it this spiritual dynamic? Is there a God kind of pulling strings and going, "Hey, give that person that much and this that much"? I don't know, but I've got this kind of like consistency of these amazing things happening that at the time was just constantly a pat on the back. You're on the right path. You're doing the right thing. You should be going to Bethel. This is the right way to be a Christian. That's how I was constantly interpreting these things. But yeah, that was kind of where I was at. And so on some levels, I was constantly evolving in my faith. I was constantly changing. My mom having me question and ask these questions, like that was pushing me and spurring me on to change and evolve. But in no way, shape, or form by an academic definition of deconstruction was I deconstructing, because that requires you to change core values and become less certain of the values you now hold. And there was only more and more certainty as I progressed. Like I became more fundamental, more black and white, you know, because I'd finally found answers. So you were like figuring it out.
You're like, "Oh, I have a question here. Okay, this is the answer. Let's put that into the jigsaw," kind of thing.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah. It's like someone studying maths, you know, like the further along that path you go, right? Once you get to like theoretical math or whatever, they're going to be pretty black and white about 5 plus 5 is 10, right? You might be questioning 5 plus 5 is 10 when you're like 4. But by the time you're doing like PhD maths, you're like, no, 5. Well, actually, I don't know. I've heard that actually that's not how maths works. And sometimes there is a question because there's a whole thing of like 2 plus 2 isn't 4, or I don't know. So maybe theoretical maths is too far. It's too far you go. But as you go on, you're like, no, we got this, you know?
Yeah.
And so for me, it was just, I was becoming more and more certain because I was figuring this out and I was getting answers. I was, you know, I was praying to God and I was getting an answer. I was reading the Bible and I was figuring it out. And so it's very black and white by the time I approached Bethel. By the time I got there, really black and white, very passionate. Yeah.
Okay.
How are we doing on time? Going for a while? I don't know.
Do you want to take a break?
No, I'm okay. I just want to... Oh. That's way less time than I thought it was. That's great.
Okay.
Cool. I thought we'd be going for like an hour. It's like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Cool.
We've been talking so much.
I know. Sorry. You should talk more.
No,
but like, obviously, it's my life.
This is your journey. So, yeah.
I would say, guys, I let Tilly talk a lot more, but the truth is I probably don't a lot of time.
No, really doesn't.
I'm a monologuer. No, you do talk a lot.
I have to like try and butt in. Okay, so I guess we should talk about Bethel then. Like, you know, once you got there, like, where to even start? Like, would you say you just continued this thing of like asking questions, filling in the blanks, like?
For the most part, I was just so fundamental. I was so insanely on it. You know, I was the most passionate I could ever be about anything. That was it. If I'm here, I gave up a business for this. I gave up my life. I gave up, my freedoms.
I mean, this is a lot of your personality anyway. Like,
very black and
for
white.
anyone who knows Phil, he's very extreme. Like, he will, everything you do with such energy, such like.
I'll break a door handle opening the door.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like, I will do everything at 110%
it's all or nothing, so,
if I can. Yeah. So I mean, and that is the way I approach this.
Yeah.
Like even things like people that were at Bethel, like it was like 20 hours a week. So it was like 4 days a week. You had 5 hours of lessons, teaching, tutorials, doing outreach on the streets, whatever. It's 20 hours a week. I just come from running a business, which was probably a 70, 80 hour a week endeavor. I mean, like if anyone's started their own business and is running it, like it's a big deal. So I'm like, this is like an amateur hour as far as like the requirements of me. And then they were like, oh, we require you to read one book a month as well and write a book report. And I'm like, one book a month? I'm like, I just took a year off.
And these are probably
I've been
pretty straightforward books, right?
They were Bethel books.
Yeah.
They were mostly published by Density. What's it called? Publishing. Destiny Publishing.
Right.
But it was a common joke because they frequently even typoed their own name. Like it's not the greatest publishing.
Okay.
I'm sorry if anyone listens to this and they work there. But we actually at one point we had a fun like school football game. I think it was like the first years against the second years, and they thought it'd be funny to make up strips, and they made up strips, and they actually got it like sponsored by, and then they typoed like Destiny Image. Destiny Image, that was what it was called. Sorry. Well, I'm even further throwing people under the bus if that's where you work. But yeah, so I mean, these were like very simple, basic, big writing, easy words.
Lots of stories,
there was
right?
no academic. The teaching pastor that I'd been under at the Brethren Church, he was giving me like, books that were like 50% footnotes.
Yeah.
He was getting me to study systematic theology. Suddenly I'm reading like, oh, let me tell you a story. And it's a bit like if a bird does this, isn't it? A bit like that. And that's beautiful. I mean, I sign me out. I'll go read Rumi, or poetry or, like there's no, that's not to say anything dismissive. But what I'm saying is it didn't take a month. When I had only 20 hours to fill.
Yeah.
So I was insane. I made myself a schedule.
Of course.
So my schedule was I got up in the morning and I worked from 7 till 12. 12 is when the school started. You can tell that this school was run by a bunch of 20-somethings. School started from 4 and ran 12 and ran to 5. But from 7 till actually I got up at 6 and I prayed in tongues, walking around the block, around and around and around for an hour.
Yeah.
And if it was too cold, which it did get, even though it's California, it did get a bit cold in the winter. I would I had a sliding closet. And I took praying in the closet really seriously. And so I got in the closet and slid it shut. And I would just sit in the dark and just pray in tongues, really intensely. So I did that for an hour. And then from 7 to 12, I studied the Bible. I read books. And I would read a dozen books a month. And I was trying to... And this is where my challenging component is. This is where my my kind of maybe my prod towards deconstruction comes in is... I realized all the books they had recommended us were books of people that taught at the school.
Yeah.
Whether they were resident to the school, like they were the teachers that ran the school, or maybe they were a guest speaker that came every year or whatever. But I'm like, they're all the same people. I'm going to hear this stuff in the school. And I'm reading their books. I'm like, and I love that. It was great. I'm like, cool. I can't wait to read a book by that person. But I'm like, I'm not really going to learn as much as I could if I was reading books by different views and different authors and different perspectives. And so the first week the first month I had to reread Bill Johnson's When Heaven Invades Earth, and I read God is the Gospel by John Piper. I'd read it before, but I was like, I want to reread that because
totally different, right?
They're basically the same. John Piper and Bill Johnson. I'm sure they'd be best friends. And I read Brian McLaren, A New Type of Christianity. Again, these three people
Bethel,
will never be found in the same room.
Yeah.
Like it just wouldn't ever happen. Like they would never, they do not have space for each other particularly. Maybe they would be gracious towards one another. I'm sure all three are very nice people, and I know that. But they would not click theologically, right? And so very, very different positions. And that's how I kind of took my education as I was going. And so the whole time I'm going through Bethel, I'm challenged by certain perspectives, specifically the more fundamental conservative positions, the Calvinist positions. I'd kind of done that. I was kind of coming out of that into this charismatic movement, and I was kind of like, I've done the kind of like the Bible is to be read so black and white, like, and kind of almost very childish, or childish. I don't mean it to sound so offensive, but just without too much thought about context and the surrounding, but just very much like, well, it says that, so it must mean that, without going, well, what were those people like, and like looking at a bit of context.
And that's like, that's more of like the kind of, oh my gosh, I'm getting mixed up, like that's more like where you'd come from, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like maybe the Brethrens would
Exactly.
be more like, okay, we need to read it in context, whereas the Charismatics would be more like, oh, let's just open the Bible up randomly, and that's God's message for me today.
Which really annoyed me because
Yeah.
of my background
Yeah.
with like kind of the Brethren and taking the Bible seriously.
Mm.
Do you know how much time we had for Bible study in the 20 hours? 1 hour a week.
Wow.
And that was it. And you know what? It was the 1 hour a week, that room was empty.
Really?
People just didn't go to the lesson.
Wow.
They just didn't care. So,
Yeah.
what's the point? And I was like, this is the main thing. How can we do all this other stuff if we can't then point to the Bible and invalidate it?
Yeah.
Which goes to show, right? I mean, I couldn't even have an experience if it wasn't allowed in the
Yeah.
Bible. Even if my experience happened, I'd be like, okay, so how do I back this up? You don't have to back up if you just got healed, right? I mean, people that just got healed don't need a Bible verse generally, right? They just go, cool, I just got healed. Me, I'm like, where's the Bible verse? So that was just my kind of mentality. But these two worlds were so clashing. And then I'm reading this third perspective. I was really trying to read a lot from the progressive church and the emergent church. It was much more known as the emergent church at that point. And that was really
Like Brian
challenging.
McLaren, right?
Yeah, I remember reading Shane Claiborne. A new, what was his one called? Irresistible Revolution, I think it was called, and it was a brilliant book. And I think they moved to a city. I can't remember what city it was, maybe like Seattle or Vancouver. It was kind of cool, like kind of city they moved into, and they bought up a bunch of property. They all moved there, and then they just like loved their neighborhood. They started going door to door and saying, hey, are you using your garden? If not, we could plant vegetables and we'd look after it, and then you could just have some free food and we could teach you how to look after this. And they would go, oh, and by the way, we've got a teacher that lives at this house, and every day after school your kids can go there and she'll tutor them and help them in any areas they're struggling in. And I was reading this and I'm like, God, this sounds amazing. I'd love to do that. I would love that. Right? You know me, I would love that. I'd be introverted, so I'd hide most of the time. But when I came out, I'd be really engaged with this. And I was reading that and I'm like, God, I'm like, how do we have a spare bedroom in our house?
Yeah.
When like people are like giving up everything and like, living in these conditions so that a homeless person could be cared for, so that, what, and of course there's this whole dynamic of there's complexities to that. But I remember having a talk with one of the senior pastors and going like, how is it a Christian ethic to have a spare bedroom when there's a single homeless person in the town?
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not saying you have to have that homeless person live with you, but I'm like, do you know what I mean? It's like we have so much excess and yet there's so much lack. And so I was starting to very much think about these kind of progressions. People that are aware of spiral dynamics, I've got a series on spiral dynamics. I talk about it all the time on the podcast. I know you're aware of spiral dynamics. You're probably, if you're aware of that, you're hearing this journey that I'm going on from blue to orange and now into green. I'm starting to look at the world a little bit beyond just myself. And what's funny is, sorry, go for it.
No, I was just thinking, like, it's just interesting, isn't it, how like the charismatic church can be very outward looking in a lot of ways of like, right, we want to go and do healing, we want to go and prophesy, we want to go and do treasure hunting or whatever, but it's so focused on the spiritual, isn't it? And so you can be, and I remember thinking that myself when I was in a similar kind of churches, like it's like, but this person's homeless, like, okay, we can pray for him, but like, are we not gonna give him some food as well? And it's so interesting, isn't it, that kind of perception?
Yeah, it's weird because the charismatic church elevates the spiritual world so much that you almost manage to create this like cognitive dissonance that actually we just got this person prophetic words and they're closer to being saved. That's much more important than a sandwich and a pair of socks.
And you know what? It's not even just the charismatic world. Like, I think back to when I was in a much more evangelical church, and then it wasn't about prophecy and healing. It was about, well, they need to get saved.
Yeah.
But they say a prayer, they need to get saved, and then that's it. They're great.
Yeah.
Like, and it was like, once you've done that, they're like, okay, well, why aren't you evangelizing? Like, you've got another problem? What? Like, so it's not just the charismatics either.
Yeah,
like,
no, it is. It's, I think we all do it. And the thing is, though, if you stop and you think about it, and almost all of us can, because we came from that, most of us, and very few people deconstructing as the starting point. So most of us are coming from some form of Christianity where that was the case. If you can try and enter into that mindset
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Duh.
They're going to hell.
Hell, I'll starve to death if it means I go to
Yeah,
heaven rather than eating and go to hell. Like, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, on a very, very tangible, real sense, when you're that way programmed, of course it's more important I get this
Yeah.
homeless person to go to heaven for eternity
Yeah.
than make sure he has one more comfortable night in a hotel
Yeah.
or gets some food tonight. Of course, there's a good argument for can we do both. And I will say, Bethel did a lot in their
I was gonna
community,
say,
and a lot of the churches
Yeah.
that both of us have been a part of do lots in
Yeah.
their community. But a huge amount of churches are very, I mean, the UK is a great example. The UK has had a huge surge in food bank demands through COVID. But even before then, the food banks were run by church, financed by church. And they know this. If you took the church out of the equation, the government would go, holy crap, we can't run food banks.
Yeah.
And so the church is doing a huge
Yeah,
amount of good stuff.
absolutely.
And so none of this is black and white church bad,
No.
this good. But it was for me as I was moving on. So
Yeah.
as I'm moving into Bethel, I look back at the brethren and go, oh, they're just wrong. And then I look back upon my upbringing and my parents as Baptists. I'm like, oh, they're not right, they're wrong. And so there was a very black and white progression. And so even as I'm starting to look at the progressive church and some of those things, I'm going, they're right. and
Yeah,
I'm wrong.
yeah.
And I got really into the grace movement as well, which is very fundamental, very black and white. You know, people like Joseph Prince, John Crowder, a lot of different names fall into that bracket, and there's a spectrum within that. But it's very fundamental. It's very Bible. And it's very like, ooh, the Bible says it's not about legalism, it's about grace. It's all about grace, which is a beautiful message at its core, but it's very fundamental and black and white and quite legalistic in a lot of ways, right? Because it has no time for legalism and it has no tolerance for legalism. So there's still this us and them. There's still this very
Yeah, I
black
see what
and
you
white
mean. Yeah.
context.
Yeah.
In the same way that progressives still have a very big us and them,
Yeah.
right? You know, you just have to look at very strong left-leaning people and say, what do you think of Trump and Trump supporters, right? Wow, there's suddenly a very
Yeah.
us and them from a group that
Yeah.
wants to be very inclusive.
Yeah.
And so we all do this on some level
Yeah.
at times. But I was starting to do this, and I was starting to see this more and more. And I think it was easier for me to move into kind of a lot of the progressive Christianity stuff because that was a lot more normative in the UK. I think the UK church, generally speaking, is a lot more socially justice orientated. And largely is a lot more left-leaning because the UK historically has been a much more politically left-leaning country. Like our right-wing politics is still probably quite central for
Yeah.
America. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And so when I went to America, I was struck by like a church that was, I was there for both of the 2008 and 2012 elections where Obama won both. But in both, my church were passionately against Obama. And
Yeah.
I was like, wow, like on paper, I'm looking at his speeches and I'm like, Obama is a way more reasonable, well-spoken. He seems much more legit. He seems like he's putting forth a lot more Christian principles, and yet my church was very much like, oh, but it's about
Abortion,
abortion, it's about
homosexuality,
homosexuality.
yeah.
And the truth is, I was like, you're right. Yeah, you're right. I guess the Christian vote is Romney. It is, I'm trying to remember the other guy that ran against him during that period, McCain. And so I got quite brainwashed into that as well. So
Yeah.
even coming from the UK, I came to America, I'm like, whoa, you all have guns. Like, I thought people with guns are crazy because we don't really have guns in the UK. And then I'm starting to go, well, actually, there's a bit more nuance to this. So what's interesting is in some ways, when I did that switch, I got very fundamental and I actually bought into a lot of where Bethel were at. So things like abortion, homosexuality, things I was like, oh gosh, yeah, really important. It wasn't as important a conversation in the UK, mostly because those two battles had been lost politically in the UK. By then, that was over. That wasn't a conversation, and Christians weren't going to overturn those laws anytime.
I mean, don't get us wrong though. Like
Christians
they
still
are.
are
Christians
think
still
it's wrong.
Yeah.
on the
yeah.
whole.
Yeah.
But they're just not making those huge
Yeah.
points. They're not speaking from the front, going, "Hey, vote for this
Yeah.
politician who might overturn it." Or
Yeah.
so in some ways, I was quite fundamental. But in other ways, what it did was it actually allowed me to see nuance. So things like the gun topic. I came from the UK where I was like, God, Americans are nut jobs running around shooting their guns in the air, going yeehaw, right? I mean, obviously that's not very true. It's true of some Americans, but it's not true. You get there and you realize, oh gosh, so you want a gun because you actually don't even need it, and you don't even believe you're owning a gun for protection. You're owning a gun out of principle because of this concept of the freedom to bear arms, and that's a really important principle. And I'm like, I actually understand that principle and I like that principle. I just wouldn't own a gun still. But like, yeah, no, that's an important principle. And I get that kind of context. Or you're worried that, you know, your government rise up against you. Now, of course, your government could kill you all in a room with a mosquito that's like a drone that can poison you. Or I don't know, like, I mean, there's all sorts of things. They made drones that can literally fly into you. They're like basically just a bullet that can go in a room, it's got a camera and it can fly into you and kill you.
Nice, thanks,
I know
babe.
you're going to have good dreams now.
Phil likes to freak me out.
But the point is,
yeah.
having a gun isn't going to save you from the government if the government wants to do these terrible things. You know, like a lot of people in the Middle East have guns. They're not doing so well against the American government, you know? And so to me, I was like, these are kind of nonsensical arguments. So I started to see like this kind of like this, there's pros, there's cons, but I understand the context behind it. I understand the heart. I get to know these people that I'm like, oh, I would have written someone off that was going, you must have guns. And I'm like, nut job. As someone in the UK, when I get to the US and I live with these people and I'm talking to them, I'm like, these are not nut jobs. These are some of the smartest people I know. And yet they hold a radical right position politically. And I would be more left-leaning, probably more central left at the time. And I'm going, oh, this isn't about smart or stupid, you know, this isn't about are they educated or not. That's not what it's about. And of course there's data points where some of these things shift a bit more one way or another in certain topics, but on the whole this wasn't just like, oh, uneducated people think they have to have guns, oh, people that didn't they aren't very smart, they vote for pro-choice, you know, that was not true at all. And so suddenly I had to start engaging with like, there's more nuance to these topics. And I think being at Bethel, that's where I started to seeing the world a lot more gray and realizing, wow, maybe it isn't either or. Maybe I'm not going to land on the perfect answer every time. And maybe sometimes the right answer right now will become the wrong answer later. And so you look at something and you go, certain things aren't going to change overnight. You know, they just aren't. So they weren't going to go from abolishing slavery in America to having the first black president in America in 2 years, right? It wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that it's a good thing it took so bloody long between those two things. Obviously, it's a terrible thing. But I am saying it's probably quite natural that these things took time. It's heartbreaking. It's horrible. I mean, the abuses, even like when they like overturn slavery, and then what are they doing? They're basically introducing a law where it's illegal to be black because you're not allowed to be unemployed or we'll put you in prison. It's like, well, no one's employing black people, so they just start carting them off to prison, and then they have them working in prisons for free, and they're basically slaves again. You know, so I'm not saying things were done right, but what I'm saying is you wouldn't have been able to convince a single person to vote to overturn slavery if it had meant that the president would be black tomorrow. So the point is that these things sometimes have to take time. They have to happen over a period of time. And so I'm looking at these things going, gosh, sometimes the right thing right now is actually the wrong thing long term, but it's the right thing right now. If I'm going to convince an extremist, hard right person as a slightly left-leaning UK person, I'm going to have to figure out, is there somewhere in the middle that I can start to bring them to, that they might accept that? Because they're not going to accept what we have in the UK. They don't like our culture. They think we're communists, right? Because we're too socialist. We're a very capitalistic country in the UK. But we're this blend of like post-rational socialism and capitalism. But they see any type of socialism, post-rational or pre-rational, as communism. It really is the way that a lot of hard right Americans would see that. And so I'm like, okay, how do you even have that conversation? And so these are the kind of things that I'm starting to go, there's this grey world between these black and whites. And I think even still, I might have thought, well, obviously over here, that's where we're trying to get people. We're trying to get people to go there. But I was starting to realize that actually we can entertain the grey. Maybe we can take baby steps along the way. And so it's still very fundamental in one sense, but I was being kind of softened up in another sense.
Do you think in your faith you still had like some absolutes?
Oh, loads of absolutes. Yeah, absolutely. I was very black and white. At this point, towards the end of Bethel, I started to travel and I started to speak. I'd been blogging, I'd been putting stuff on social media, and people had started to ask me to come to churches and do conferences. And I was helping at Bethel. I volunteered for 2 years at Bethel with their they had a network called Global Legacy. It was an amazing thing that helped tens of thousands of churches kind of see what Bethel were doing well and try and apply that to their churches, their communities. And so I helped out with that for a couple of years. And And because of that, I was doing some traveling and speaking in Bethel affiliated churches. But then I was also doing this stuff of like, I was traveling and speaking in churches that were reading my blogs and connecting with me. So there was like two very different dynamics, because when I was traveling for Bethel, I had this very conscious thing of like, this is Bethel I'm representing. I'm going to give a Bethel message.
Right.
I'm going to share what Bethel would share. But then other times I would connect with churches that weren't connected to Bethel and were just interested in what I was about. And I'd be able to say what I wanted. And what's interesting is really what I found is in both cases, I probably started to gravitate to speaking something in the middle, because saying what I want was way too much for most churches anyway.
Yeah.
And actually saying exactly where Bethel were at, well, actually it wasn't helping people move forward. It was just teaching them what they already believed, and they just pat themselves on the back, and that was it. And a lot of people at church want that, but it's not very helpful for helping them move forward.
Yeah.
And so even in that, I was starting to realize, okay, how do you help people change? Because if I come in and go, this is what you should believe, that's not going to go well. Like if you believe there's no virgin birth, right? If you went into an evangelical church and gave a message on the fact that there's no evangelical, you're not getting an invite back, right? You're not coming back. You're lucky if you get to go out for lunch with the pastor after that. People aren't going to listen. They aren't going to accept it. They aren't even going to entertain the thought. I'm not saying there's no virgin birth or is virgin birth. I'm just giving an example of an extreme position for an evangelical church. But if you go to the evangelical church and go, okay, how can I talk about the birth narrative of Jesus? And how can I introduce that some components have a metaphorical context? Not they may or may not be literal as well. But how can I let people see beyond the literal and see the symbolism in that? And so what you do is you start allowing people to engage with these in a little bit less serious, right? A bit more, not less serious, but less literal, less fundamental. And so that's the sort of thing I was trying to start doing in churches. And that was really only as I left Bethel, I started to do that. And when I left Bethel, I made a hard policy of I would never go to a Bethel church, like a church that wanted me because I was at Bethel. Because I didn't want to, by the time I left Bethel, I had almost fully deconstructed in a lot of ways. There was very little left of my faith that was identical. We still had some core values of like, we believed in God, we believed that Jesus was the Son of God maybe, but there was a lot that had been deconstructed. And I was constantly feeling I was walking on a tightrope, because I was obviously always trying to respect and honor where they were at. I never spoke out against Bethel. I never spoke out against Bethel leadership. I challenged some Bethel leaders one-on-one or in a group together. And we had some healthy conversations. Generally speaking, they did quite well with that.
And what were these differences? Do you want to explain that?
A good example might be like, I remember having one conversation with the leader of Global Legacy at the time, and we were writing some documentation on helping churches around the world replicate what Bethel did, and it was on the topic of worship, right? So they were trying to create some write-ups of like, this is what you can do in your church, this is how to do worship, this will make it an amazing Bethel music experience, right? Which of course, by the way you have Bethel music is you have like 1,000 musicians show up and audition and pick the best and most beautiful people. I'm
assuming that wasn't in their manual.
No, especially the second part. But that was basically a big part of it. But there was lots of other parts about how they would go, oh, this is how you transition into worship. This is how you set people up for worship. You share testimonies that make people realize how great God is and how big God is, and remind them of how good God's been in their lives. And, these things kind of set you up to be like really pumped to sing to God and worship him. And so, sorry, I just had a thought if that's recording, but it is recording. Sorry, everyone. So in this manual at the beginning, it says, one of the things we want you to do is we want you to be thankful for a whole month and celebrate your worship leader for bringing you into the presence of God. And I was like, that's just not true, is it really? I'm like, they don't bring you into the presence of God. Like, what are we saying? Like, so are we saying that people aren't in the presence of God? And even when they get to church, they're not in the presence. It's not even like the church is the house of God and you're in the presence there. No. Even then, not until the worship leader gets on stage and goes, all right, everyone, come with me. I was like, that's just, and I was like, I get the language works for some people, and I get that people can see what that, maybe a worship leader understands there's technical components to that. What they're saying is they're helping people turn their attention onto God, or they're helping people realize that God's here and that they can worship or whatever. But I was like, that is really toxic language, because what it does is it says God's not with you. any other time.
Yeah.
And what it says is we need this person to bring us into the presence of God. And I was like, there's got to be a way to honor this worship leader and say thank you for what you're doing, for how you help us open our eyes to God being present, without saying that people aren't present, that God isn't always here. And so this ended up being a big argument because the leader was very passionate about this point. He believed. He was like, no, there is something that a worship leader does that brings you more into the presence of God.
Yeah.
And so we had this big heated fight. Like it was heated, but I went out for lunch with the guy afterwards. We had a good chat and we enjoyed it. You know, people actually really did handle me really well. I was always impressed by that, and I'm always thankful for that. But yeah, so we had moments like these where I was just like, guys, most of the time I would just work with where Bethel were at and go, oh, that's fine, whatever. Yeah. But at certain points I'm like, these manuals are going to 2,000 churches.
Yeah.
And you're telling 2,000 churches that their worship leader brings people into the presence
so things that might be actually really harmful, right?
Or if you're a brand new person, comes to church, not really a Christian, maybe if you've been in a charismatic church for 20 years, you know exactly what that means when they're like, oh, we're just going to enter the presence of God. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, I know what that is saying. Yeah. I know that I'm also in the presence of God otherwise. Yeah. But if you're new and you don't really understand it, you're like, oh, so there's something... I enter, so when I come to church and worship, I'm in the presence of God. But when I go home and with my family, I'm not. That's not something I wanted people to be taught. And so certain things I would push back on every now and again. But for the most part, I was quite quiet. I didn't really go into the fact that, you know, maybe I thought a lot of things at Bethel were too political, were too prosperity driven, were very legalistic a lot of the time, very like works orientated. A lot of healing and stuff and things like that were very orientated around what you were doing, and you were very demon focused or whatever. And do you know what? As I say all those things, they were much less all of those things than most charismatic churches. They were as far as if you're going to be a charismatic Christian, I think Bethel's a pretty good place to go. But they were homophobic. They were still quite sexist in a lot of ways. They were very progressive in their sexism, you know. So they allowed women to speak and a lot of different things. But if you look at the senior leadership team, it was all guys, right? If you know, it was certain things where you start to look and you go, oh, so this is still a boys' club then. Yeah. And so for sure, like there was different things, and I'm not saying that as a how dare they. That's just where they're at, and that's their flavor of Christianity, and they are continuing to grow. But we were coming to a point where I was just... There was no way for me to really work for Bethel anyway, so I had to volunteer the 2 years because I'm a UK citizen. It's illegal for me to work. There was even things where I did like a really huge job for a project, and they're like, we want to thank Phil somehow, but how do we do it? And they're like, can we give him a gift card to Walmart, or is that technically going to like get us in trouble and people won't get visas to come to us and get you in trouble and you get kicked out? Like there was things that was really problematic at times. They were like, oh, and they're like contacting like, I guess like someone in their staff knows the legal implications, and they're like, well, if you do this it'll be okay, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like it was really complex. You must have really
struggled financially then, like living there for how long and not getting paid?
I consistently had a bank balance somewhere between $0 and $1,000, just always somewhere there, and the most it ever got was about $1,000, and I got paid. Even when I traveled and spoke, I couldn't take an honorarium. So when people wanted to say thank you for it, so I'm the best guest speaker you ever had as a church because I'm free. They're not allowed to spend money on me. So they'd spend money. They'd take me out for a meal and they would pay for my flights or whatever. But they couldn't give me money. It was illegal. And so, it was a really problematic component. Sorry, I've got an itchy nose. So it was a weird one for sure. But actually, I did really well financially. I looked back after I left Bethel. So I was there for about 4 years. I looked back. And in those 4 years, I gave over $15,000.
Wow.
To the church, to ministries, to outreach, to missions. I just constantly, money just kept coming to me, and I kept giving it away. Like because I had this mentality that had been driven into me that I shouldn't have money. I think a lot of it, I grew up poor, and then I entered my own business, and we started doing well, and I started making a lot of money, and then God told me to leave the business, and I think I had to learn something about not having money as an idol. It was really important to me as a kid. I did not want to be poor like my parents. It does annoy me, the narrative that all pastors are wealthy and rich, because actually the vast majority of pastors are not.
It's just these mega pastors generally, isn't
it? I think America is a different context as well to most of the world.
Much more extreme.
It's much more common for American pastors to be paid much more salaries. But so like I had to relearn that actually what my parents were doing was not living in poverty. They were living in contentment.
And they chose a life of going, we're happy to go to a church that can't pay us if it means we can love these people that would not get a pastor otherwise. And we're happy to go and work in this really rough area because no one else is willing to go there. As a kid growing up in that, I saw that as a huge suffering, pain, whatever. And so I wanted to rise out. I wanted to become wealthy. I wanted to make something for myself. And then as I did that, realizing actually there's not much to this either, I let go of that and had to learn, I can just trust. And even today I use those principles. I might not have exactly the same language, but I use the principles of like, if I give into this world and I'm generous, and that's why I do everything I do for free. I know you know this better than most. Everything I do for free. I don't charge for anything. And yet we survive, right? We make money even when you weren't working at all. So you work and you make an okay amount of money. But before then,
because I was training.
You were training. We survived. It was tight at times, and there wasn't a lot, but we survived. And so I've always had this principle of as long as you're generous, as long as you keep giving what you're able to.
Not in like a religious way though, right?
But not in a religious way, exactly. We don't give a specific amount to the church every month. We don't give. There's maybe some maybe some patrons I give an exact amount to every month, or whatever. But like, we're not going to do that legalistically, religiously, but just in a general attitude of like, if we have people like, I remember when we were much more involved in the church was like constantly, I was helping the young adults a lot, and they were like, let us know what you spend and we'll make sure we reimburse you and stuff, which is a really lovely thing because they know I don't have a lot of money. But I was like, no, this is actually, I don't even want reimbursed. In a sense, I'm like, that's almost takes away from the joy of I get to give. I get to buy food for all my friends that come round. I get to, whatever. Like I want that to be a thing that I'm doing, not just something I'm doing via the church, or on behalf of a church. And so when I was at Bethel, there was moments I was pretty like, dang, I wish I hadn't given any money to Heidi Baker last month. And anyone knows Heidi Baker, you never want to not give money to her. She's like looking after the poorest of the poor in Mozambique and giving homes to orphans. And so you can't have her come to church and not end up giving money. But then afterwards you're like, oh shit, how am I going to pay for rent? And then again, like you just have this moment of like, okay, I've had this thought 100 times, and every time the rent gets paid, let's stop freaking out. Let's relax.
And I'm sure at the time you would have seen it as like, God's going to provide. You would have had that kind of narrative.
Every time. That's entirely how I framed it at that time. Was very much like, I'm positioning myself to quote unquote live by faith, which is a bizarre, I understand that phrase, but in another sense, actually it's very disparaging to everyone else that has a job, right? Because you're not living by faith. But of course that living by faith can be 110 different things. I think it in that context it's a bit different. Exactly. And even if it's financial, in some sense, you're living by faith. You've got a faith that this job's going to continue, that whatever, or that you don't have some massive emergency that costs you all your money. You end up with no money anyway. Or if you're in America, you don't end up like really ill and end up like penniless, so everyone on some level, in some way lives that way. But so for me, it was very much, it was very freeing for me. And I'm very thankful for that season of extremism, because I was very extreme in that season. I'm very thankful for that because it has positioned me to trust in a way that I don't think, if I'd come out of work and somehow deconstructed and gone straight into what I'm doing today, I'd really struggle doing what I do today. Like we have a very up and down income from my side, certainly. Yours goes up and down a little bit as well, even. But like, Tilly tutors kids, in case people are interested. But so like, that fluctuation, that income where someone giving $5, $10 a month can be a great change. It's like, oh great, that's a sizable, we've got $60 more, $120 more a year now. Like that adds up quite fast. Very few people live with that day in, day out and have trained for that in the same way that I think that season at Bethel where I wasn't allowed to work for 4 years, that trained me to just trust and just trust that God, the universe, whatever it is, it's in my favor. It works for me.
Probably like learning just how to budget and like be frugal and that kind of stuff as well, I'm sure.
That's a huge deal for me, learning budgeting. And as terrible as Dave Ramsey is in so many different ways, I'm so thankful for he was my introduction to like, hey, you've got to get budgeting. You've got to figure this out. And I was like, gosh, yeah, I really do have to figure this stuff out. If I'm going to survive on nothing, I want to be intense and serious. But at the same time, actually, I remember in that season, God's telling me, and I use these phrases, God telling me, that's where I was at. I don't know what I would say necessarily now. But God telling me, I want you to not budget for a few months because you're just getting too focused on, do I have enough and whatever. And like, I remember when I first got to Bethel, I had about $400 in the bank the first month, and my rent was $400. And I remember I was sitting down and I was writing up a budget, and like someone asked me, do you want to go to like In-N-Out Burger for a burger? And I'm like, dude, I can't afford an In-N-Out Burger. And I remember I felt God say, dude, you can't afford rent next month. He's like, you can go have a burger. And I was like, that's such a good point. I'm looking at $400 in the bank, and my rent is $400 a month, and I'm trying to figure out how I budget $400 for really 9 months. You know, that's not going to happen. Anyway, and so it was just this moment of going, oh, like, what am I doing? I either have to trust this or I don't. Like, I don't have an option to like to budget. You can't budget $400 for 9 months. That doesn't work.
No.
And so it was just a very it was a wild season. It was a really weird season, but I'm really thankful for it in so many ways. I learned so much.
Cool.
Yeah.
Should we take a little break?
Yeah, let's do that. Welcome back to part 2, which is for us part 3 because I didn't record my audio. So we are now 3 hours deep in a what is 1 hour recorded podcast.
So we seem tired.
It's because we've been going for 3 hours.
We've literally just done this for 2 hours. Now we're having the same conversation.
We're laughing because at the end of the last one, we're like, well, this is kind of a boring conversation for both of us, really, because we know my story. And even for you to just listen to my story, now you have to listen to that part again. You'll be able to ask better questions knowing what I might say.
Hopefully, yeah. I'll be like, that wasn't so good the last time.
Yeah, let's steer him away from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here we are.
Okay.
So we left off, we were talking about Bethel and stuff, right?
That's right, yeah. Okay. So, I'm like, do I ask the same questions as I did? I think, so the one thing that we didn't really talk about so much in part 1 was in terms of your because you mentioned that you deconstructed a little bit at Bethel. We didn't go so much into detail about exactly what were those beliefs that you deconstructed that you had started to question or let go of.
Yeah. So, I mean, there was a lot of things, really. I mentioned I was reading, like, kind of a lot more progressive books, and so I was starting to ask questions of, why are we as a church not more focused on the other? There's a lot of, like, let's get people saved, but there's not, can we go and, reach people that are in these broken positions and change that? A lot of Jesus's teachings of heaven on earth were about go find someone that's sick and heal them. Go find someone that's poor and give them some money.
Yeah.
Go find someone that's hungry and feed them.
Right.
And we do that in church sometimes, but generally speaking, it's wrapped up in so they get saved.
Yeah.
Right? Even a lot of our ministries, we're like, oh, bring homeless people to church so they get saved.
Yeah.
Like we'll give them a meal and it's like, so they get saved. Or we'll bring kids to the kids ministry so they get saved. It's like we can't do anything without that.
For its own sake.
And it makes sense because that is the cornerstone of faith.
Yeah.
So a lot of those things were coming in, but also like some of the other kind of components of that are more outward focused things like, why are we not affirming of gay people? LGBTQ community, what is our issue? Like, can we look at this differently? And realizing I can look at it very differently. I can come to terms with this in a very different way and approach it in a different, unique way. And so, that was a really big issue for me. Seeing hell differently, that historically there's been many views of hell and we've been given one. And that seems really kind of very pigeonholed. Or the end times, like everyone's like, well, does Jesus come back before the rapture for you or after or during the rapture? What do you think? And I'm like, the more I study it, I'm like, well, the rapture is a new idea. It only came up like 160 years ago. What did Christians believe for 1800 years, when the rapture wasn't on the table? And so starting to ask these questions that people are like, what? Like, why are you asking these questions? That's not the question. Of course there's a rapture. The pastor talks about rapture all the time or, or whatever. And so realizing that there was just so much to deconstruct. There was so much to wade through. There was nothing that wasn't questionable. And so during my time at Bethel, I had the time suddenly as well. Like before, I mean, I was running a full-time job. I was working 18-hour days, literally 18. I was sleeping in the office sometimes. And for like 3 years, you know what I mean? Like we were working our butts off, me and the guys that started that business. And I didn't have space to do this. Like occasionally I'd be thinking about some of this. And you know me, I do this even when I'm tired. I'm gonna like, like, oh, what about this? But suddenly I had hours and hours and hours a day, and people were asking me for my opinion, which only fuels me more because I want to be right.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, well, I better get the right answer. So when people ask my opinion, I can give them the right answer. That was certainly where I was coming from at that point.
Was that a deconstruction then, if you were looking for the right answers?
Well, exactly. So this is where it began for me.
Yeah.
I'm really struggling to remember where we were episode
I know,
1 and 2.
me too, yeah.
So if there's some repeating in here, guys, I'm really sorry. But yeah, so your deconstruction, I mean, it has 3 components, doesn't it? And did we cover this?
Not in the first part.
We didn't.
You're
Okay,
good, you're
so
good.
you have to question core values. So it's not like secondary issues or peripheral issues. Some people talk about those. Core values are, you know, like, is there a God? Did Jesus really die and rise again? Was he from a virgin birth? Really? Like, those are questions that are like gonna really shake your foundation in Christianity.
Would you say one person's core beliefs or values might be different to another person's as well?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a core value in a Unitarian church might be very different to a core value in a Southern Baptist church. You know, like that's going to be changed. But across the board, generally for conventional Christians, what's acceptable as Christianity for most people, the core values are going to be relatively similar.
Yeah.
And so you'll find that certain things cross a line regardless of where you are. So things like maybe even affirming homosexuality. Across most of conventional Christianity, if you go into a church and say, I affirm gay people, or I am gay.
Yeah.
Could I be your senior pastor?
Yeah.
Guess what answer you're going to get in most churches. Now, of course, that's starting to change, and some churches are changing.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, that would be a core value for some people.
Yeah.
Whereas things like, hi, I know a lot of you here believe in a rapture after the, Jesus returning after the rapture. I'm kind of thinking he might come during the rapture. Could I be a part of your leadership team? Could I be an active part of your community? People would be like, yeah, that's a secondary issue. We're fairly chill on that. Some churches, again, might be really intense about that. But generally, it's a secondary issue. And so, for me, it's the first part is the core values being challenged. And then the second part is that the core values don't stand up to the challenge and you have to change them. So you actually find yourself believing radically differently to your traditional faith. So those are the first 2 parts of deconstruction, and I was definitely going through that.
Yeah.
The third part, it's a qualifier to deconstruct. You are deconstructing when you tick all 3 boxes, but a lot of people are beginning to deconstruct without ticking this third box yet. The third part is to have more uncertainty than you had before. So these new answers that you have, these new beliefs you have, you hold them lighter than you held your prior beliefs. At this stage, I was still very fundamental. I still held a lot of my beliefs that I came into more fundamentally, or at least as fundamentally as I held my old beliefs. And so I wasn't really fully ticking that academic perspective of what deconstruction is early on. That was growing as time went on. Even at that point, certain things I was like, yeah, but that's not a game changer for me. And actually, I might be wrong, so I'm going to hold it quite loosely. Other things I was very fundamental about. I was very into the grace message at that time, and a very grace message a lot of people think of like Joseph Prince, John Crowder, C. Baxter Kruger, these kind of names, Steve McVey. Very fundamental, very black and white, which is kind of funny, of course, because the grace movement was like all about letting go of legalism and being gracious and inclusive, but it was still very black and white. Not many gay people in the grace message, you know, like leading that message. Not many, whatever, like they're still very black and white in a lot of ways. And so I was still very black and white in a lot of ways. There were certain things I was becoming less certain on, and other things I stayed very certain on. And so, yeah, I think I was deconstructing, but I was early in my deconstruction at this point. I mean, this is 12 years ago now, so I mean, it's still a while back, 13 maybe even years ago.
And was that affect? You're going to struggle to answer this, I know, but for the viewers, like, how did that affect you emotionally? Like,
looking back on it and trying to reflect on it, I think it did. So for people that don't follow me closely, I have something called alexithymia, which means that I have the full range of human emotions. But generally speaking, I struggle to identify while I'm having emotions. And so when I'm upset, when I'm angry, when I'm happy,
often I don't know I'm upset, angry, happy. It's often you that's like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I think I'm fine. And she's like, looks like you're a bit down. And I'm like, oh, okay. And you're like, what's happened today? And I'll talk to you about my day. And then you're like, that sounds like something I'd be upset about. Do you think you're upset? And I'm like, yes, that's what I've been feeling today. Oh, interesting. So it's basically a disconnect between two parts of the brain that don't talk as well as they could. And it's very common in a lot of people. About 1 in 10 people have alexithymia to some degree.
Wow.
But it's a huge spectrum.
Yeah.
You know, so obviously most people don't have it in a very strong degree. But a lot of people that are disconnected from their emotions maybe might have some compartments of or components of alexithymia. But the reason I say that is it makes it very hard for me. Generally, I only ever really reflect on emotions.
Yeah.
Like I look back on my day, I look back
Yeah.
on a period of time and go, what was I feeling then?
Yeah.
And I have to kind of construct it from like, oh, so I had like a fight with that person, or I got really, whatever. I locked myself away for 2 days and I was really whatever, and that might mean that I was probably very frustrated and upset, and maybe it was because I felt like this. So looking back on that time, I think I felt very conflicted. I felt very hidden. I felt I couldn't be myself.
Yeah.
I also felt a great drive. There's a thing in me to fix the world, to help people, to change people, especially at that time where I was more black and white. These days, I have a desire to help people grow and evolve and change, but not to change into me.
Right.
Back then, because I thought I was right, I
Yeah.
would look at things and go, this is wrong. How do I help people come to where I am,
Yeah.
which is right, which is, of course, hilarious, because in 2 weeks, you're going to believe a different thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think I was constantly kind of warring with a lot of emotions. I felt very held back at times because I think a lot of people at Bethel knew I was very vocal, I was very well liked, but at the same time I was very controversial, and there was a lot of problems with potentially including me in certain things or giving me a platform. And so I felt constantly frustrated that people would talk around that issue. Oh, we can't hire you, Phil, because you're international, and that's a problem.
Right.
We couldn't get a visa for that. And then they hire my friend that's from
Yeah.
another country, and you're like,
Just be honest.
okay, so it's not just
Yeah.
because of that. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's some components of that, but it feels like there was something else going on there as well.
Yeah.
And eventually we kind of did part ways a bit more clearly of like, look, we're just
Yeah.
very different places. And I was very happy with that as well. I felt I needed to cut the tie there. Because I had started to travel and speak. I'd always, in that season where I was volunteering at Bethel, I traveled and spoke for Bethel to some Bethel churches and stuff. But I always had made that about what Bethel's message was, what they were about, what the church had asked us to speak about. Often wasn't what I was particularly interested in. I never spoke about my stuff or what I was about. It was kind of a very kind of line in the
Right.
sand. That's Bethel's world, and I'm gonna just do what Bethel would have. If they had anyone from Bethel show up, it would be the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas I was also doing my own stuff at this point, and I was starting to go to churches and do conferences.
And that was more like the grace kind of
Exactly.
message,
This
right?
is people that are reading my blogs
Yeah.
or listening to a podcast. I had a podcast many moons ago. I don't know if you'll ever find any of the messages on that.
Have you deleted them all?
I haven't deleted them, but I think I just stopped paying for certain hosts or things like
right.
that. And some people might have downloaded them. They might be somewhere. If you look hard enough, there's plenty of messages on church websites from when I visited and spoke
Yeah.
or whatever. But I wouldn't recommend it. The vast majority of people listening to this or watching this are not going
Yeah.
to be in that place where
Yeah.
they'd find that particularly helpful or interesting. But yeah, so when I was going to those places, I was very conscious of like, okay, what are they wanting? They're wanting the Phil that wrote this blog or
Yeah.
whatever. They're not wanting someone from Bethel. Sometimes there was an overlap, of course, and I had to constantly walk that line of like, how do I respect Bethel and not whatever. When I left Bethel, I just drew a line in the sand and I said, anyone that wants me to come who also knows that I'm from Bethel and that's a part of that, I just didn't go. I said, look, I'm not going to go to you if you're wanting me because I was
Yeah.
at Bethel. I just thought
Yeah.
there's too much of an ethical question there of like, am I using my Bethel connection to try and build my own thing? And and there's yes and no's and pros and cons to how you could construct an argument around that and whatever. But I just thought this is just too messy and it's much
Yeah.
cleaner to draw a line in the sand. So I only did my own thing from then on. And so that was much easier to go about.
than when I was at Bethel. And so leaving Bethel was a really helpful thing for me and a healthy thing for me. It allowed me to really flourish and just do what I wanted to do, which, of course, because I was deconstructing, was not fully who I was or what I wanted. It was finding a middle ground between me and you, because where you're at, if I teach there, I'm going to die. And actually, what am I helping you? I'm just patting you on the back for believing what you already believe, which is, in my opinion, not particularly that helpful or healthy or whatever. But if I teach you where I am at, it's going to go disastrously. So I need to find some sort of mechanism to help you move from A to, I would say Z back then, but probably from A to D or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, like help you take some steps forward. And so I was always in this middle place. And anyone that does anything public knows this, that there's a component of where you're at and what you would say to your closest friends is not always what you would say online, because it might not be helpful for everyone. It might not be the best way to communicate a message. It might be more effective to still be authentically you, still be true to who you are and what you believe, but said from a perspective of the person that you're speaking to. It's understanding your audience and stuff. And so that was the world I lived in for a long time, probably like 8-9 years. I was living in that kind of middle ground, which was really hard to do. I got good at it and enjoyed it. It wasn't hard in the sense of like technically or intellectually. That was definitely at times like it was a challenge or something. But what was hard about it was the emotional component of like spending 180, 200 days a year around the world in different churches and different homes, talking to people, and there being a component of they don't really know me and I can't really let my hair down. I can't really tell you what I think about these things. I'm constantly watching my words and saying what is helpful for you on this journey. Yeah, that was a challenging component. But to be honest with you, it's what brought me here. If I hadn't gone into those places, if I hadn't stayed in the church and worked in the church, I wouldn't have found so many people that were deconstructing. I don't know if I would have found validation for my own journey. I didn't know people that were deconstructing outside of people I bumped into when I went on these trips, and I would stay at someone's home and they're like, that message you preach, I like that. I really like it. Would you say it's like this, or could it be said like this? I don't tell my pastor I said this, but what about that? And they would start to see where my message might go, and they would go, that's kind of where I'm thinking as well. Or they might see that there was a bit more safety with some uncertainty or asking a question here or there. That there was some permission given in a sermon or in a conversation that when behind closed doors, when you went out for a meal or when you went to stay at someone's home and you went back to their house, they would be like, can I ask you a question? And you start to realize that all over the world, there's thousands upon thousands upon thousands. I mean, there's millions, of course, of these people that are deconstructing, and there's no safety for them. There's no one, they don't know anyone they can turn to. This is like close to 10 years ago now. It's about 8 years ago that I really started seeing this phenomenon more and more. And it was probably because I changed, not because anything else changed. I think this has been going on for a lot longer. But people didn't know. They didn't have words for this. They didn't have the evangelical, deconstructing, all these terms. Even today, most people don't have these terms when it starts.
Yeah.
You just stumble into this world and go, oh my God, thank God there's a whole world of people doing this.
Or you're just like, I'm backslidden.
Yeah, well, exactly. If you don't have the
words,
you're going to take the Christian side of it, which is backslidden, apostate, heretic.
Yeah.
They're not the most positive list, are they?
No.
And so, yeah, I think that's the beauty of it, is I started to see this, and I think we did this in the first round, or when we lost the recording, but we talked about like how I ended up becoming a leader in this kind of space. Like, it just was natural. The more people I talked to, there was like, oh my God, there's like thousands of people in this place, and no one's quote unquote pastoring them. There's pastors for people that are conventional Christians that are doing fine, and maybe they're not doing fine. Maybe their wife's sick, but they need a conventional answer to their conventional Christian framework for their conventional kind of world view in this particular hardship or something. But there's no one for when you go, I'm not sure if I believe in Jesus anymore, or is God really a guy? Like, can God be a woman as well? Or is God beyond masculine, feminine concepts? There was no one there for them to ask that. And I was like, oh my gosh, well, surely in a world where there's millions and millions of people, more than 1 million people in America every year are starting to deconstruct and de-church and leave their kind of like traditional concept of faith.
Let alone the rest of the world.
Let alone the rest of the entire world. That's like 1 million people. And I'm like maybe helping like, at this point, like a few hundred of them.
Yeah.
I'm like, I hope I'm not the only person, right? I'm like, Jesus, I'll die overnight.
Yeah.
So, and
do you think there was no one else doing it back then?
No, there was loads of people were doing
okay.
this. You know, even like you think of someone like Rob Bell.
Yeah.
Who was very vocal, very like, wow, like he had a big fall from grace, but he had his podcast, he was helping people.
Yeah.
And, I mean, obviously that's quite new as well, actually. It's only about 5-6 years old, I think he's been doing that. But like, there were different people that were doing this. Like Rob's writing a book called Love Wins. That's speaking to people that are deconstructing and asking big questions. It's not speaking to conventional Christians as much. There was loads of people. I've talked to people on my podcast that are like, oh yeah, I started talking about this and writing about this like 15 years ago. And I'm like, oh my God, where were you when I needed you? And so I think the difference is that we're just seeing more and more community grow. I mean, this is the 15 years ago. That's like the very cusp of the beginning of like Twitter and Facebook and stuff.
That's
like,
true. Yeah,
we didn't
social
have
media,
these
of
like
course.
amazing tools as much as they're terrible tools as well.
Yeah.
We didn't have these tools like Instagram and Facebook to kind of bring us together around topics and hashtags. And so I think there were people doing this. I just think there wasn't a space like there is today. And even now, I mean, there's a thriving community. There's loads of people doing this, but it's not enough. We need more people having this conversation, more people standing there going, I will make space for you. Come and talk with me, process with me. Like most of what I do day in, day out is just listening. All I do is just listen to people tell their story and just say, that sounds horrible. That sounds terrible. I'm really sorry that you're going through that. That's basically my job. Like I occasionally will say, I understand what you're saying there. I've talked to other people that are going through this. Your situation is very unique, but actually in a lot of ways it's very similar. And so many other people are going through a similar thing. You're not alone in this. The power of that is very simple from my end, right? My job is not hard in a lot of ways. But the power of that to the person hearing it, oh my God, like, because you do feel alone. You do feel one off. You do feel like an absolute insane person. You do feel backslidden and heretical and God's forsaken you and like whatever it might be. We need more people doing that for sure. And so why I'm doing this is because there's a desperate need for it. But I just kind of grew into it.
Yeah.
And I said in the other recording as well, I keep mentioning the other recording. Sorry, guys, it's gone.
Well, it's just
there's
one
a
side
really,
of it.
really bad version. It was like your microphone where you were loud and I was quiet, which maybe is a better mix. But I said in that other one, I think there is a component within my makeup, my personality, where I am a big personality. I do naturally tend to, in a room, just kind of jump in and make a big statement and be the center of attention. And sometimes I hate that, but most of the times I probably love it, right? And so there is a part of my ego that naturally tends towards the stage, the leadership, the whatever.
Is that part of your Enneagram? Is that
Apparently, yes.
Really?
I'm not strong enough on the Enneagram, but people that are on that, like apparently my strongest one is 8, which is like it's to do with like challenging, but it's also to do with protecting others. And but yeah, I think there's a big part of that. From 5 and a 3 as well, my next two. So if you've got the 3, you've got the heart, the gut, and the mind. Is kind of how the 3 are broke. Those are my main ones, and I think with that mix, it does. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not very good on the Enneagram. But like, I definitely, I'm certainly wired to challenge, to speak out. And I think, generally speaking, that puts me in front of other people. Because like it or not, I might not be the best person to be there and noticeable. But because I'm speaking out against people that are saying wrong things or speaking out against wrong theology or challenging the church, because I'm doing that publicly, people notice it.
Yeah.
They go, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just doing it. I'll just do what I can. Maybe I know a bit, but
You do.
yeah. So I think it's definitely part of my personality to do that.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely negative components to that as well, of my ego and my I like being, I don't know, noticed. I mean, right? We all want to be noticed. We all want to be accepted and loved and not
seen.
rejected and seen and understood. And a lot of that is wrapped up in that for sure. I'm slowly, a lot of that is dying and a lot of that is becoming more healthily formed and shaped. But there's certainly some negative components or toxic components of that still alive and well, I'm sure, within me. Yeah, I think it's just a natural part of growth, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I took your one question from you there.
No, it's great.
In that
You've
bit,
ticked off 2 questions.
I was just remembering.
in that, so
This
that's
would
good.
lead into that
Yeah,
really well.
and it was natural, good natural flow. So that's great.
This re-recording, it was 2 hours. It's going to be like
It's gonna,
an hour by the time we end.
So just backtracking a little bit. You got divorced, didn't
Yes.
you? Was that?
And I got married. We didn't even bring up the fact I got married.
No,
so.
I think we did.
Oh, we
did
did?
we not mention that? I think we mentioned
Maybe
that in
we
the first
did.
part. So you got married and you got divorced.
Yeah.
And people were asking, how did you make peace with your divorce? So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think I got married in the midst of being very fundamental and quite certain in a lot of ways. And I was deconstructing in some ways. I'd started to unravel in a little bit. But on the whole, I was still in that Bethel world. I got married to someone else that was very wrapped up in the Bethel world.
Yeah.
She was in Scotland. I was in the US at the time. And we met when I went back home. We got married like a few months later.
So you met, did
It's
you
very
meet
rapid.
when you were actually in different places? Did
No,
you not?
we met when I came back to Scotland.
Oh, okay. And then you had to go back.
And then I
again.
had to go back, and
Yeah.
we did long distance.
Yeah.
And then I came back, I think, like a few months later, and we got engaged. And then I went back, and then we came back, and I got married. And then we both went to America. It's very back and forth.
Yeah,
but
so did you,
a
like-
lot of long distance.
Did you not have much time then actually in the same place before you... That's really interesting.
I would say, I mean, collectively, over that year, we probably collectively were together for about 4.5 months. So, I mean, it was still like
Okay,
a
yeah.
decent chunk of time.
Yeah.
But it...
Not long,
it's not
really,
a lot.
to be getting married to somebody.
Absolutely. But in this world, you get married to people you barely know. It's just a
That's
normal
Christianity,
thing.
isn't
And
it?
it's... and even like... there's so much wrapped up in this where neither of us were really ready for this type of relationship and this level of relationship. And I have to say, Sarah is amazing and was amazing and was a great wife, amazing person. We both had our flaws. We both had our like amazing qualities, as any couple do. But we both were not really in a place, looking back on that, to be married and probably to be married to one another. It was a very healthy in some ways relationship, but a very unhealthy relationship in other ways. We both just had a lot that was going on. I was still figuring out who I was. I was still figuring out my faith. I was still figuring out my identity. I still had so much of my upbringing that was quite toxic. My masculinity, my sex, my identity and sexuality, like my understanding of like what sex looks like and things like that. Like, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, we got married for the same reasons that all Christians get married. We want to have sex. We want to, like, you know, be in a relationship for more than a few years. We're going to have to get married. That's the rules, you know?
If you want to live together.
We want to live together.
Yeah.
All these things, like, it's like done, you know? You have to tick all these boxes. And so I think there was a lot of stuff going on there that wasn't very healthy. And I feel so much for Sarah because I was not in a place where I could love and be in a relationship, a partnership with another woman in a healthy way, because I still had so much sexism. I still had so much patriarchy in the way I thought and interacted. And even when the marriage came to an end, it came to an end because Sarah basically said, look, I don't think this is working and I want to leave. I want it to be over, you know? And we'd done a bit of therapy and different things, but she was just like, it's not working. I want out. And I really fought that. But looking back, I didn't fight it because I loved her. I didn't even fight it because I wanted to be with her. Maybe because I wanted to be with her, but why did I want to be with her? Not because I loved her, not because I wanted to spend my entire life with Sarah. I fought it because of my ego, because of my identity wrapped up in that story, the marriage, the relationship. I fought it because...
it's like a failure, maybe.
Yeah, I've failed God. I'm a failure. What will
Yeah.
other people think? Because I'm in ministry. People don't look on people that get divorced well in ministry. That's a failure. That's a whatever. Like, so there's so much ego. And the fact, looking back, I'm like, God, that is a great sign that you should leave that relationship, right?
Yeah.
Like, of course. And how many relationships? I mean, we've all had relationships where we look back and go, oh my gosh, that was just unfair that I tried to make that work for so long. It wasn't fair to the other person, never mind to me. And so I look at that and I just like, gosh, I'm so glad she kind of came to that point. But for me, I really fought that. I really struggled with it. I really warred with it. It was a really painful. I was about a month, 6 weeks of real agony, real pain, waking up in the morning just wanting to go back to sleep, because at least when I was asleep, I wasn't in pain. I mean, it was just like horrifying. Didn't eat, was just upset all the time, just was not in a good place.
Yeah.
And it's only through kind of like contemplation, reflection, that I realized, wow, this is all me. It's all my ego. Everything about this is me, 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 me. Even in our relationship, I don't really know why Sarah left. I have an idea of why Sarah left, but it's my idea, it's my thoughts, it's my beliefs, it's my worlds that I'm creating. And I actually sent her a message. I said, look, would you be willing to talk with me? And I know I've not done well at listening. I'm not going to talk. You can Skype me. Back in the day of Skype, no Zooms then. So you can Skype me. I won't talk. And I just want to hear, how have you come to this place and this decision, and why do you want to end things? And I won't argue. I won't try and convince you. I've done enough of that. And she was really gracious and accepting to do that. And I really am thankful, because it was probably without that, I would have really struggled.
Yeah.
But just listening to her talking about it, I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't even about me. It's about you. Because we all live our lives about us.
Yeah.
Right? We're all these kind of like individual, everything we think is like from this center of gravity out. And so she's telling me things, and I'm like, oh, I thought it was because I didn't love you well enough. I wasn't a good enough partner. I wasn't good enough sexually. I didn't spend enough time with you. I spent too much time with you. I didn't get to know your friends enough. And sure, some of those things were in the mix, maybe, but really it wasn't that. It was, I just think we could do better. I just don't think we're very healthy. I think we're probably basically more like we'd be amazing roommates, but like we're not really like, I wouldn't, having a family together, things, I just don't think this works. I think we could do better. And she's right. We could have done better. I've done better. I'm sure she could have done better, because looking back, I'm like, that wasn't the most healthy relationship. But I would never have done that. Maybe one day. But at what point? When I had 4 kids,
Right.
when we had a massive house, I never probably would have had a massive house. Maybe she would have got a good job. But realizing, oh my gosh, that's such a unhelpful thing. But realizing when she said all this stuff, and realizing there's nothing I can do to change this stuff. This is just where you're coming from. And she was saying, she's like, I know we could make this work. She's like, you've talked nonstop the whole time when I've said, I'm not sure this is working out. You said we can make this work. And she said, I know we can make it work. I just don't think us making it work will be a particularly great thing. Why kill ourselves for an average relationship when we could go out there and have a great relationship with someone?
Yeah.
And that just took a weight off my shoulder, because it wasn't that I agreed with her. It was that I realized it doesn't matter. She's not in.
Yeah.
And you can't have a relationship with only one person in.
Yeah.
And so there's just this weight lifted, and I suddenly felt this freedom to just be me and figure out, what does it look like next? What next? Stop beating yourself up over, why did this happen? What could I have done differently? Instead of doing that, just go, what next? Because I can't change the past, but I can change what the future looks like. And that looks like working today on my life, and I'm in my personal identity, on some of the stuff that she didn't like, maybe, or some of the stuff I don't like, certainly. Excuse me. And so, yeah, I just think that freed me up so much. It allowed me to recreate really healthy relationships, especially with females. So when I was with Sarah, before I met Sarah, I had really great female friends. I've always connected a lot as an adult with females, a lot more than males. I have friends of both, but
yeah, you have some great guy friends as well, don't
but
you?
I do really connect very closely with women generally. And for Sarah, that just she wasn't very comfortable with that, and that was okay. That was just where she was at, and that was the kind of boundaries that she needed for our relationship. But it never worked very well for me, and I really probably had a lot of resentment, hurt, and different stuff. So just to be able to rediscover having friendships with girls again, I'm like, oh gosh, this is really great, and it's healthy. And that allowed me to start really engaging with a lot of my sexism, a lot of my patriarchy, a lot of these machism and unhealthy masculinity and different things that I hadn't really explored. I should have, and I could have. I just wasn't in the place to do it. I needed that pain to push me into that. Because Sarah studied women and gender studies. She was a harsh feminist, really not harsh, sorry, hard feminist, really passionate about that. And I just wasn't in a place to be able to connect with it. And it's actually only afterwards I was like, gosh, I missed an opportunity there, and I want to learn about these things. I want to grow. And so it's brought me to a place where I can be a much better partner for you. Our marriage is so much more healthy. because of the things I
Yeah.
have grown through that and faced that, and even how I see relationships, how I see what marriage is. Like, marriage going into my first marriage was really toxic. It was really unhealthy Christian thing of like, you know, I'm the husband, you're the wife. Like, we have these roles that fit this term, and marriage has to happen. Like, we could not be married and we'd have just the same relationship.
Right.
It's a term, it's a bit of paper.
Yeah.
I love getting married. I loved our wedding day,
Yeah.
but that's irrelevant to us, like where we're at,
Yeah.
you know? Whereas before, that was a thing, and it was a thing to preserve and protect and uphold, and there was so much behind that, and there's so much connotation behind, like, oh, I'm a married person. Now I'm not in this relationship to preserve the relationship. I'm in this relationship to see you thrive and grow and flourish. And I think in a Christian relationship, that's a scary thing to allow your partner to do, because as we change, it puts pressure on the relationship. Actually, the relationship is much more comfortable if we just stay exactly the same. And that's why a lot of people would deconstruct. There's a real pressure there because, well, I signed up for someone that believed the same as me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think, so coming into a relationship and saying, no, I didn't sign up for you to believe what I believed. When we got married, we did not believe the same things, and we knew that. We had the same sort of framework, the same sort of ideologies, generally, core values. But we were accepting of, like, some of those might change. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. And so it's just a very different position to hold a relationship. It's much more open-handed. It's not, I'm not jealous if you speak to another guy. I'm not scared. Or I was quite jealous and intimidated because I think Sarah was more free and more developed and mature than I was. That I was like the person. It's funny because I talk about, you know, she wasn't comfortable with me having girlfriends. I probably wasn't that comfortable with having guy friends. Like, we were both like working that out. She worked that out long before I did.
Yeah.
And now, like, you know me, I'm like, gosh, I wouldn't have a problem with you having just guy friends, 100 of them.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
I'm just not gonna live insecure. I believe that you love me, and I'm gonna trust you.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a very different way to live. And so I'm actually really thankful for that season. I wouldn't suggest anyone goes through a divorce. This wasn't fun. It was horrible. It was painful. It was heartbreaking. But I can't look back on it without smiling and being thankful, because it made me a better person. It brought me to you. It made me a better husband. I'm only better for that. And I'm not in touch with Sarah anymore. Like, we just haven't stayed in touch. But I really hope it worked out for her as well. I really hope that she did find a much better situation for her, whatever that looks like for her. Because what we had just wasn't great.
Yeah.
And we could have probably made it good, but I'm really glad I got great instead.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Awesome. So I guess we might as well talk about our relationship now.
Yeah.
Leading on nicely from that. So some people were asking about, like, deconstruction and how that's affected our relationship.
Yeah. So when we first got together, like, you were just kind of like early into your deconstruction, really, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I think that's a big factor, is like,
yeah, we were in pretty different places.
yeah, very different places. And we continue to be in different places in many ways. But like, how did you perceive that? Or like, where were you at, like, going into the relationship? Like,
I think you, I remember, like, when we were first, like, dating and messaging, you were like, you were testing the waters a lot, weren't you? To, like, see, like, whether, whether it could work, as in with being with, you know, if someone, like, really fundamental had been with you, like,
oh, it would have been bad.
It would have been really bad. So I remember, like, on one of our first dates, you were like, I think we went to, like, this natural history museum, and you were like, oh, so I think the Bible says that the Jews were never in Egypt or something like that.
Right.
You were, like, just, like, throwing little things in there, and I was like, oh my gosh. But I didn't have, like, a total meltdown, but in my head I'm like, oh, well, what does that mean about the Bible? And, like, you definitely triggered a lot of my deconstruction. But I think I had already, like, so I'd grown up, I've been to a lot of different churches. Like, I grew up going to, like, Baptist churches, but then I then kind of transitioned more to, like more charismatic churches, and that's where I was at when we got together. But I'd also like studied philosophy at uni, and I think like I do have quite a natural driving me to question things. So even, you know, at the church I was at already, I was asking some questions about like certain things. I was like, well, that seems a bit weird, or you know. But so I'd certainly doubted, and I'd always like, you know, been like, oh, I've got these doubts, I need to try and find the answer, like get a book and, you know, search it out, rather than just being like, oh, okay, like, or just whatever. But I think for me, it was the Bible was a huge one for me, and what something that you really made me question, which really was difficult, because I think I'd always seen that as like the go-to before, of like, if there's like people saying, oh, well, homosexuality is right or it's wrong, or I'm like, well, what does the Bible say? And then I think so having that as like, oh, well, maybe we can't use that as the ultimate authority, or like you know, take it at, you know, 100% kind of as truth, that was like pulling the carpet out from under me. And I found that really difficult emotionally, because I mean, I think it was my whole world really, like was my faith and my relationship with God. Like I'd had a lot of struggles beforehand, and that was, you know, the thing that got me through it, really, a huge part of it. So it felt like it was not only taking away my beliefs, but also like my coping mechanisms, I suppose. And you really helped me through that, of like, you know, I guess because you were further on the journey, I could see, well, Phil's okay at least. And also you knew a lot of people, you know, some of your friends were deconstructing as well. And so that was really helpful, because I wasn't alone in it. I think, like, so having that community, and also having a church, like, which was so accepting, because the church, when I moved to Manchester to be with you, the church that you were part of was very just really welcoming and loving, and like everyone is welcome here, everyone is loved. It's not about, at the time it wasn't like, oh, this is, you know, what do you believe? Do you sign up to this like set of doctrines? It was just like, no, we love everyone, and that was really great. I think our in terms of our relationship, it was interesting, especially in the early days of things like, well, I'm like, well, we need to make sure we pray together. And you're like, oh, I'm not really into that. There are a few things we had to figure out. But then as my journey's progressed, now I don't see prayer in the same way at all. And, you know, I think I feel like there's, for me, a lot more freedom, I think our relationship's really great, and to be honest, probably a lot better for not having a lot of these.
I would not wish fundamental Phil on you. Like, God, that was not a fun person to be around. I'm already probably not fun to be around sometimes, but like, I can't imagine being like stuck with me as a more fundamental person. Like, and I wouldn't want more fundamental Till.
No, neither would I. Like,
that doesn't sound fun either.
No.
So I think it's interesting, isn't it? And it was like constantly figuring out, like, okay, there's going to be compromise in this space, right? And so like, you're like, I'm still in a place where I kind of like want to pray, and like I want to like have some sort of, you know, you were much more attracted to church than I was. Generally, church wasn't something I was excited about. It was something that I felt passionate about. I want to be involved in a local church and trying to help them move in a healthy direction, especially because the church we were a part of, the leadership at the time was very open. They wanted people that were deconstructing and going through shifts of faith, and from a different perspective, if people were gay, they were like, please come along. We would love to have you here. Like, so in a very open and inclusive position, and I was really excited to be a part of that. But I didn't like church services. Like, I was constantly trying to change. When I was in leadership, I was like, hey, maybe we could do a week where we just kind of all discuss, instead of like having a a worship set and then a sermon and then we have a prayer time. Like maybe we could just all sit and talk about what we believe about something. Like we could read a passage in the Bible and discuss it, or read a poem and discuss it. And so things like that I was quite excited about. But you probably were much more attracted to something like church than I was, and it was like, okay, that's fine, we can work that.
Yeah.
You wanted to pray more than I did, and I was like, okay, it's not something I'm big into, but I can try. And I probably did really badly.
You did try.
I really remember doing that very well.
We didn't try many times.
No, after that you were like, honestly, that's just making me more panicked. Hearing you pray is terrifying.
Like, you have never been into music, full
I don't
stop,
like music,
let alone worship music.
Yeah.
So, like...
Road trip with me is sit in silence or talk for like 8 hours or listen to podcasts, but never really listen to music.
Unless it's Hamilton.
I do like Hamilton. Yeah, I like music that's got a very clear kind of like story.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's just... It was just finding, like, where is this person at and how can I love them well in that place? And you've had to do that for me just as much as I have you. It's never been a thing of like, oh, well, I'm further along in deconstruction and therefore I need to hold space for you and, you know, wait for you to catch up.
No.
Not at all, really. At the same time, you've constantly had to go, oh my gosh, like Phil is in a totally different space and I need to figure out how I can kind of help him and meet him somewhere in the middle as well. And so it's been very give and take on both parts, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think everyone goes through that to different degrees. And in some ways, it would have been really nice if we started deconstruction at the same time, and you know, we could have gone through a lot of those things in the same way. But in other ways, it's been really nice that there's been a disconnect in the timeline because, like you said, you've been able to look to where I'm at and go, oh, it's going to be okay, maybe, or at least have friends and go, gosh, those friends are okay. Okay, that's fine. It's not so terrifying. Or maybe I can go, oh, that's a particular question you're worried about. Here's a podcast you could listen to. Or here's a book. Like maybe that might encourage you. That's my answer to everything: a book or a podcast.
Another interesting thing I think for me was that because I think in general I really like having certainty, like, and it just makes me feel safe and in control of. I'm like, oh, I know this is how it is. And I remember, like, particularly in those early days when I had a question of like, you know, well, is there a heaven or not? And I would really take everything you said at such faith. Like, you're the authority on this. You know everything because you're further on this. And you do talk with such, you know, you've read so much and you talk with such confidence. And obviously now I've...
You've learned to appreciate that most of that's just bullshit.
Yeah, but no, not bullshit, but like... I think that was an interesting process for me of like learning to embrace uncertainty and mystery while also being like, oh, Phil has some really good thoughts on this, but it's not like he knows
absolutely
at all. And
and half the time when I give you an answer, it's not what I even think.
Yeah,
it's just me going, oh, I've been thinking about this recently, and this is quite an interesting idea.
Yeah,
like, and I'm like, so here's an answer. Like, I'm like, wouldn't that be interesting? And I'm quite different to you where I engage with things quite intellectually, you engage with things quite emotionally. So if I can kind of go like, you're like, oh, what do you think about the afterlife? I'm like, maybe there is no afterlife. I don't know. Like, that'd be interesting, wouldn't it? And, or what if we all are the same person, but we just, when we die, our consciousness is transferred into another person. I don't know. You know, it's come up with like crazy philosophical, theological ideas. And I can engage with that and be like, that's an interesting idea. Interesting. How would that work? And I can just play with that. And it doesn't cause me to get scared or upset or whatever. But for you, I mean, you study philosophy, you can engage intellectually in these levels. It's not, you're not smart.
Yeah.
It's that when you do, it has a very real emotional impact. And so it's not as easy for you to do that or as fun to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like having a internal crisis.
Yeah. So then in those kind of conversations early on when I was aware of that, I would have these kind of conversations because that's how I do conversation. Like I'd be like, oh, maybe this, maybe that, maybe this. Not
then I would
you need a certain
like,
answer.
You'd suddenly look over and I'm like in tears.
Yes.
And you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, exactly. I've just like broke Tilly.
Yeah.
I mean, so there was constantly figuring out what people need because I think as well that was I do this day in, day out, help people deconstruct, but it was a whole nother level of being so close to someone as they did it, realizing people deconstruct differently.
Yeah.
People are deconstructing different things in different ways, and they need different tools and answers along the way that help them in their worldview and their need for safety or certainty or rationality or whatever it is that they're needing in that time. I think that really helped, having someone so close to me go through this.
Yeah. It helps you maybe to understand what people go through more.
Yeah, and empathize with it on a whole nother level. I mean, a lot of my friends have gone through this.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the church that we were a part of, a huge portion of that church ended up deconstructing. Walking alongside a lot of them helped a lot as well in that empathizing on a whole nother level, because it's one thing to like meet someone when you travel and talk to them, or talk to people on Instagram or Facebook or something like that's helpful and it's beautiful, and I absolutely love that, but it's a lot harder to empathize with someone over a text than it is to try and talk to a best friend as they weep right next to you because they're losing God, or you're like, oh my God, this is like way more emotional than that text I sent when I was having the same conversation with this guy called Greg, or like that was a different conversation. But that's probably how Greg felt.
You just weren't aware of it.
No, and it's, in my defense, it's hard to pick that up on a text without some emojis.
Should we talk about church? And,
let's do it.
Like, I know we have talked about church, but particularly like over the last few years, like being part of, we were part of that church, and how did you find that being part of the church whilst deconstructing and being a leader as well? Like, how did you find that?
Tricky at times, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's different thoughts on how people should engage with church. I get one of the most common questions I get asked is, should I be leaving my church? Like, I'm deconstructing, should I leave my church? And like, we know that 32% of people that deconstruct are still going to church, and that number drops off as time goes on.
Right.
So as time goes on, as people mature in their deconstruction, they're less likely to be attending church. But people still do attend church. Like, people that have been deconstructing for years, decades even, still go to church. Some of them, 10, 15% of them are still attending at least once a week. I think it's really important that people contextualize where they're at and look at their life individually and go, what's going on? People that have trauma wrapped up in church, pain, real suffering. Maybe one day it might be healthy for you to go to church, but right now you probably need to distance from church and heal and prioritize that. So I say that before I say where I was at, because I don't want people to build a model out of where I was at. But for me, I really felt I wanted to be a part of seeing, can church change? Can we evolve and grow? And is there space for church to become something more beautiful, more inclusive, more loving than what it has been in the past? And of course, we were so lucky that the church I was a part of was phenomenal. It was a really inclusive and loving place, and it's amazing in a lot of ways. And the leadership there really loved me. They really accepted me. They really gathered around me and my journey, my vision, what I wanted to do. They really, even when they didn't understand what I was doing, it was really hard. I mean, I've had many conversations with them going, I don't get what you're doing. Can you help? When they did kind of have, even the fact they would have that conversation, they want me to help them understand me. Not they don't understand, they want me to change. That was never on the table from the pastors there. They were always going, we really believe in you, and we love what you're doing and how you're trying to help people, and we want you to be a part of our community. We want you to speak into our community. We want you to be on the senior leadership team and help like shape what that looks like. That was part of that process. And so that was beautiful, and I really loved that, and I do think we saw amazing changes, and I think that's why a lot of people in that church ended up deconstructing and eventually stepping outside of the church, was because they felt safe and had a safe space to do so. The challenge was a lot of people in that church weren't interested in deconstructing, and that made it really complex because you had this very broad spectrum of people in a very different place. And so you're looking from spiral dynamics, you're looking from blue all the way through to green, maybe even some yellow. Yeah. There's a whole spectrum there of very different worldviews, very different ways of engaging with faith. And what's happening is, as you keep that open for everyone, it's beautiful and great, but it's actually really scary for people that are at earlier stages that are looking for very different expressions of faith. They want something a bit more black and white, a bit more fundamental, and maybe a bit more exclusive. And I know a lot of those terms have negative connotations, but they could be very positive based on where you are. And so I'm not even saying that's a negative thing. Yeah. And And so at times it was really challenging and really difficult. And you know me, I was constantly walking a tightrope of like, how do I love people where they're at? How do I be authentic to myself? I'm not being disingenuous or lying or not being myself, but I am being careful with how I say that. I am being careful with who I present certain things to or how I present certain things to certain people. And if I'm going to share a message, I'm going to do it very carefully. Still, 9 times out of 10 cause problems for some people. But I actually did. I put hours. I mean, I put dozens of hours a week into loving that community well, investing in that community, doing what I could. Long term, it changed. So the pastors that were there, they stepped down and moved on. And the church leadership structure shifted quite substantially to a kind of more conventional kind of mindset.
Yeah, I think the difficulty was that there were just such polar opposites of groups of people in that church with such different needs. Like it would have been, you know, whenever you met the needs of the people that were deconstructing in that church by having maybe an open discussion about the afterlife or whatever.
Right.
Other people are like
freaking
out and needing like counselling, you know. So, but then if you're meeting their needs, then the people deconstructing are feeling like, oh, we're not being heard, we can't be ourselves. So it was really quite impossible to
very hard
to keep everyone, well, very hard at least to keep everyone happy. So I do really empathise with, you know. I just think it would have been impossible to please everyone.
And I think it was probably the healthy choice. I mean, along the way, we bounced around and we really were torn about how to be involved and how to what even future church might look like for that community. But I think along the way it came to the point where there was a group of people that had moved on in their faith and the way they framed their spirituality, that honestly, if there wasn't a church, they'd be okay.
Yeah.
They'd be absolutely fine.
Yeah.
So yes, they'd like church to exist in that space and they'd like it to be a certain way. But even if it didn't exist, they'd be okay.
Yeah.
Whereas this other group, their faith was intrinsically woven into this church. And
This
without
specific church.
and this specific church being a specific way even, and so there was an element of like, actually probably the healthiest thing that could happen for that church is for that to be the thing that it kind of structured around, and that's what naturally happens. And I think after that we kind of talked with the leadership. I had meetings with leadership and said, look, where are you at? Like, it feels like that's the direction you're moving. Are you trying is your goal to move back into a place of a bit more certainty, a bit more kind of black and white, kind of like this is where we're at? And they were like, yeah, that's really what we're looking at. And I was like, I think that's the right decision, which is fascinating. I think a lot of people listening to this will be like, what?
Shocked, yeah.
But I think when you understand things like spiral dynamics, when you understand things like human development, and you realize that certain people are not going to go from A to N. They need to go to A to B. And then on to C. And the fact that I'm at N doesn't mean that N's the end, right? We're all moving towards Z. So even then, it's not even that thing.
Yeah.
And then even then, it's not this hierarchy that ends better than A.
Right.
Even. It's all a journey, right? A baby is not worse than a toddler, and a toddler is not worse than a teenager, and a teenager is not worse than an old person.
Yeah.
These are just different stages of being a human.
Yeah.
And so I think recognizing, oh, there's people at a different stage than me, and they need something different. And actually, I can get what I need somewhere else, and it's really unfair for me to be constantly trying to drag people into a place where they're not ready, and actually it's causing them pain and suffering. So I think on the whole, I think a lot of people were upset, a lot of people got hurt. Like, of course, in any kind of church relationships, that's quite natural and inevitable. But I think on the whole, it was the right thing that happened, and it was the right thing for us, certainly, to kind of transition out of that. I mean, even as much as a year and a half, 2 years before then, I'd kind of stepped out of quite a few leadership roles. And certainly by that point, I'd stepped out of all leadership roles, because I had already kind of said to the church, like, look, I'm very publicly being this person. Even the fact that I was very publicly posting about deconstruction, about the church globally, that's such a problematic component where you're trying to be very sensitive to someone in person. So you go to a church where this person is very conventional, very conservative, very rigid in their beliefs. I can sit down with them and have a great chat all day, and I can talk to them, I can pray for them, I can encourage them, I can give them a Bible verse, I can, engage with them where they're at. But then they go home and they add me on Twitter, and they see me tweet like,
Yeah.
you know, XYZ the church,
Yeah.
you know, they're going, he thinks that about my church?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, not necessarily. Maybe at
Yeah.
times, but
Yeah.
generally I'm talking about Christianity. My
Yeah.
audience is different. My conversation is
Yeah.
about a different thing. It was very hard to navigate those components as well,
Mm-hmm.
of being very publicly helping people that were transitioning away from that kind of life, and being day in, day out with people that were still in that place. It caused a lot of tension for a lot of people that couldn't understand that there was a line there and a different world. And
Yeah.
also what I'm talking about to a group of people is not necessarily what I would say to every person, or
Yeah.
it was complex at times for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just aware that we haven't. I feel like I'm getting mixed up between different podcasts.
I
But
know.
I feel like
As we move
one
on, though,
thing-
surely we're definitely.
yeah, no. I was
away
just
from-
thinking about we haven't massively. I don't know. Maybe we don't need to talk about it, but your kind of with your own, just how your ministry changed, I suppose, because you were very much into the grace teaching, kind of quite a Christian message, like a controversial Christian message, but nevertheless a Christian message.
Yeah.
And then, do you want to talk about when that changed?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think that was.
Sorry, we're going a little bit back in
No,
the
it's
timeline
fine.
here,
We're
but I
back
just
to
realised
it.
that we haven't really.
No, it's good. It's a good memory as well. I think, the grace thing was it was just a natural conclusion of just continually seeking out the truth, trying to figure out what is true. And the more I dove into things, the more I researched things, I was like, God, the Bible does say this. It doesn't say that. And so naturally I found other people that were saying similar things. I came across similar people like John Crowder, Joseph Prince, C. Baxter Kruger. There was a lot of people that were talking about this. But it was still at a very fundamental stage of my life. I was still looking for the right answer. And that movement is very fundamental. It's very black and white and dualistic in the way it approaches things. It's funny because it's very it's inclusive, it's open, it's not about legalism, but it's very legalistic in a lot of ways. They are obsessed with the Bible. You talk about the Bible in that way and it's like, don't go there, or like whatever. It might be homosexuality. I mean, I don't know anyone in the grace movement that's affirming of homosexuality. I'm sure there are people, but I was probably one of the only people I knew when I was in that position. And so that was just kind of a natural it was probably the last stage of me being very black and white. And I think it was probably the most extreme of my black and white in some ways. And I think that's just naturally how it happens. We hit these ceilings where we suddenly realize, gosh, these black and white positions they don't work all the time. I'm hitting the end of this and I'm realizing, gosh, there's a lot of gray in here. There's a lot of complexity in here. The more I look at this historically, it doesn't add up. And so, I think I started to realize that some of the things I was looking at were just much more gray. There was a lot more nuance in there than I was afforded. And I think a lot of it was interacting with people as I traveled and spoke to people and realizing these conversations were much more rich and deep and more rubber hits the road as well. Like when you're just in the head and you're just reading this as a Bible verse and you're applying it to your life, it's nice and simple. And when you start talking to people and meeting hundreds and thousands of people as you travel and realizing, gosh, this actually might not work for that person who is, it's like the healing thing, right? You believe in healing and, healing works all the time and it's great. And that's great for Bill Johnson that travels and sees a healing, at least 2 or 3 healings every time he goes into a service. But if you have a mother who's dying of cancer,
right,
and you're sitting with her for a year straight and she doesn't get healed and then dies, that is a different kind of experience of healing than going to a healing service every day where someone got healed. Even if it wasn't the person you prayed for, you saw someone get healed. That's going to be very encouraging and spur on that belief and help you at least be a little bit cognitive dissonance of like, it works. You can forget the times it didn't because you saw so many times it did. I think those are the kind of things that I was experiencing, was just like realizing, gosh, there's so much gray in this mix. I think traveling really opened me up to that a lot. And having an online space, an online ministry, it exposed me. So many people started sending me messages, and people that are attracted to online spaces are usually people that can't find a local space. So they were starting to have problems with their church, their local church and things like that. And so they were starting to message me and go, like, what do you think about this? Should I leave my church? Like, do you believe this? Do you believe that? I used to believe this, but I'm not so sure. And I'm starting to go, yeah, I'm not so sure about a lot of this either. A lot of the time I was in the grace message, I had deconstructed as well, and it was just the mechanism of which I worked. I still did that, but
but in terms of your ministry, though, it was quite a change, wasn't it? When you started. Do you want to talk about when you kind of started to actually kind of come out of the closet in a sense of like, oh, maybe I don't actually agree with all these things?
Yeah, I think that was a big thing. So I probably for like, 3 or 4 or 5 years maybe, I had not really been able to be open fully about where I was at, because I had like tens of thousands of people on Twitter and Facebook. Right. I hadn't really started Instagram at this point, but they were following me, and they were mostly conventional Christians, maybe mostly engaging with grace message.
Yeah.
And I am in a place where I'm like, oh, I am affirming of homosexuality. I don't believe in eternal conscious torment. I don't believe in this X, Y, or Z. There was all sorts of different things I deconstructed. But I'm like, okay, what will people be able to handle? How do I start moving that? Maybe I start talking about the Bible and different ways to read the Bible, so that at some point people start to realize, oh gosh, I'm being very black and white about the Bible, and actually that's not the best way to engage with it. And so like just figuring out these like little baby steps. But it's just a very hard place to live a lot of the time. Like, you know me, I mean, I spend sometimes 12 plus hours a day working on these things and having these conversations and writing and chatting with people. And it's hard work when you can be yourself. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a whole nother level when you're having to do this intellectual dance of like, where is this person? How are they placed in life, and what are they looking for, and what do they need, and how can I help them on their journey without pushing them too far, but not just settling for where they are, because I know they need to grow and help. And like that was a constant juggle, and it got to the point where I realized there had been a season of about 5-6 years where I wanted to just take people baby step, bit by bit, because I realized if I just came out as where I was, everyone would walk away. But it got to the point where the pain point for me was like, I just have to be me. I need to just be authentically, not that I wasn't authentic before. I was honest. I was authentic. I just shaped things in a way that helped other people, that I wouldn't have said that way to my best friend or to you, or, like I would have been a bit more candid or said it a little more rough or to the point. But realizing that's just really just getting tiring. And
I remember as well, you felt strongly, particularly about the homosexuality thing of like wanting to actually be like, no, this is my stance on this. I don't want to have to sort of pretend or not even
just sit on the fence.
You felt like you wanted
because it was the thing of like it's such a complex thing, because we have to understand that change takes time and people grow in stages and bit by bit by bit. And like, I want my toddler to be able to do algebra. But you mean you're a tutor, right? What age can you start teaching algebra, right? You struggle at 11 if they're really smart sometimes, So we're not teaching the toddler algebra. I need to start teaching it just math, even just 1 + 1, even numbers is a big jump for a toddler. And so, like, it's recognizing, okay, that might be where I'd like them to get to, and that might be where I'm at. Lucky if I can do algebra, but I can do affirming of gay people, so I can do that. But recognizing, you look at someone that's very conventional, they're looking for safety, certainty, security, they're looking to the Bible as an authority, their pastor's authority, they see the homosexuality as an absolute end of conversation. So for me, I'm like, for a long time I was like, I don't want to jump out there and go, I affirm homosexuality, and then have 10,000, 15,000 people, not because I'm about numbers, but because I might be able to get all of them to a place where they affirm homosexuality if I have time, if I can do it slowly, and I can start to tweak how they look at a Bible. What is their view of God? How do they understand authority and scripture? Like, give me enough time, and maybe, I mean, realistically, I'd maybe get 1,000 of 10, or who knows. But my point was, I can help these people get to that place. But if I come out and go, hey everyone, I affirm homosexuality, I've lost them all overnight at a certain point when they were very conventional. And so and that's not to give excuses of like, I would genuinely prefer to be openly affirming much earlier. And I wish I had in a lot of ways. Because at the end of the day, I don't really care. Like I really, on some level, I don't care what those people think of me. And there's much more hurt Gosh, I'm not as hurt as just the average gay person,
Right.
just not being affirmed. Jesus,
Yeah.
they need as many people as possible to stand
Yeah.
up and say, no,
Yeah.
you are loved, you are accepted just as you are, you're valuable, and God loves you. Like, that is a huge need that they're not hearing.
Yeah.
Plenty of people are hearing some homophobic shit, right? I mean, that's not a shortage in the church, that message. And yet, on another side, I was like, but I want to help some of these people change. I changed from being a homophobic piece of shit. I changed from being non-affirming to being affirming. What if some of those people were me? And I know if I'd shown up to my teenage self that was passionate about the Bible at 17 or something and said, God affirms homosexuality, I'd have said, fuck off. Get out of here. You're an idiot. And so it's such a complex thing because we have to figure this out. We have to take people on the journey. And so, but that was a huge point for me, was at a certain point I was just like, I'm done not being able to live in this undercover life. I felt like a spy. I felt like someone that was inclusive, that was done with the church's racism and sexism and homophobia and all these things, and yet went, I'm not going to speak out about these things. Instead, I'm going to go undercover into churches, into the Christian realm, and try and slowly sow seeds that grow so that people can become also fed up with these things and outspoken. And I think there's a real need for that. I think that we do need people that do that. I think we absolutely do.
And I think you did do a lot of good in that. I don't want you to feel like you
Absolutely.
failed in that, in your, because the church didn't end up becoming what you might have hoped it to be, doesn't mean that people didn't individually progress in their journey.
Well, there's people listening to this podcast and watching this video that are people that came on the journey with me. And I was probably a component of that. No question. I was in, at some part, something I did was maybe helpful in them coming on that journey. A lot of people aren't listening to this podcast because I did come out. And that's okay. Like, I'm like, you know what? At the end of the day, it is what it is. I maybe would have done it a bit earlier. But I think there was, in other ways, I'm okay with the time I spent undercover in Christianity. But I'm so thankful not to be now. Like I'm like, gosh, it feels so freeing, so relaxing. I can be exactly what I want. I can say what I want. I can do what I want. And I still make the same mistakes or lots of new mistakes. But like, I'm free. It's just a real relaxing kind of thing. And so we were really intentional with how we came about it as well. There was real practical concerns as well. You were training to be a teacher at the time, and we were living off of my income, which is not an income. Like, it's very little. We really were like quite down the wire. In fact, it's only because you had some savings that we really kind of made it through that season. And so the fact that I put out a whole series on homosexuality and different things that, very much coming out and going, hey, I'm deconstructing, this is different ways to see things, I'm affirming homosexuality. We knew that would massively cut into our income. And so even that was a factor where it was like, well, I don't want to live on the street, and I don't want you to live on the street for 2 months. So let's wait 2 months and time it so that you start as a teacher and we have some income. And so even those practicalities, and I think this is the thing when we talk about people coming out as deconstructing, there's no shame in not doing that straight away. You need to figure out what's right for you. You need to figure out what's safe for you. Some people are in their teens and they're living at home with their family. If it's not safe for you, this is like when you come out if you're gay. If it's not right for you, there's no pressure or shame for not coming out. And you have to figure out what's safe. Because sometimes, God, if it's not safe for deconstructing people to come out, it's definitely not safe sometimes for people that are lesbian or gay or bi or trans or whatever. Like,
I've not really come out to a lot of people, like,
hi everyone, hi Tilly's mom.
Like, this is probably the most public I've been in it, because there's some people I'm just like, they just don't need to know, and it's not going to be helpful for them as well.
I think of like grandparents or things like that. They're not going to watch a podcast, they're not going to come on these things, but generally speaking, it's really going to cause them distress. They're probably not going to change between now and when they die X amount of time. So why cause them such suffering when you can just come alongside and go, hey, how are you doing? Oh, yes, I'm also praying for you. Or, say something like that, like, doesn't kill them. And I'm sending out all my good vibes and thoughts and energies and like, like whatever, like, it's like, I'll work with where you're at because it's not important. You don't need to come out to that grandparent that's on their, some people were like, my parents were on their, my mum was on their deathbeds, and have I done wrong by not telling her where I was really at? And I was like, honestly, you probably did the right thing. Like, that's the last thing you need when you're dying.
Yeah.
It's like a whole nother level of,
Yeah.
oh no, I'm freaking out about my son.
No.
But also, in saying that, if you've done that, maybe that's the right
Yeah.
thing as well. I just think this is
there's
a
not
formula,
like a
is it?
rule about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of need to go to the loo.
Let's
Can we
pause.
just have
Yeah.
a pause? Okay, I'm back.
Welcome back. Do you have a good pee?
I did.
Excellent.
Feel a little bit relieved now.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing we've not touched on really yet is family, particularly.
Yeah.
So some people are asking about how your family have reacted to your deconstruction.
Yeah. They all have refused to talk to me for the last 10 years. No.
Don't lie.
To be honest, like we talked about this in the first half of the podcast, like my family were very open, like and pretty chill with how each of us kind of engaged with the concept of spirituality. I think there was an expectation we would all be Christian, and like I think that was just a natural kind of like thing, obviously. But I think on the whole, like as time's gone on, I think my parents also became even more open and flexible. Just internally in their own kind of like faith, and that's reflected in how they interacted with us. My mum's passed now, but I think she certainly became more open and progressive, even leaning towards like affirming homosexuality and things towards the end. And so like she had quite a few friends that were like she had quite a few lesbian friends, and she had a trans friend, and so like I think life got on my mom and kind of helped her grow and develop in some of those areas, and challenged her in those areas.
Yeah, she just had like a lot of compassion for everyone, didn't she?
She did. Like she just she loved anyone on the outside. I think she really took the compassionate component of Christianity, of looking to the other and loving them as God.
Yeah.
Like that person in front of me, I don't care if they're trans, if they're gay, if they're white, if they're black, that person is God.
Yeah.
And I need to love them.
Yeah.
And so even when she didn't have a framework or understanding, she just loved them really well. And I think my dad did that in many beautiful ways as well. And so I think they automatically kind of like were positioned to just love me well throughout this process. I think it's only really in my period of being very open about deconstruction publicly that they probably would have seen that. And I think really my mum probably never fully saw to what degree I deconstructed before she passed. I do think she probably would have been very supportive of it on many levels. I mean, she wrote little notes of like to each of the children when she passed, and like just like whatever, and in that note, I can't remember it word for word by any means, I should have looked it up. But she says like, she's like, I love how you challenge the norm, you question things, you're helping people that need to ask questions, and you tenaciously go after that, and you're authentic, and I love how authentic you are, and never stop being authentic to what you believe. And so I think I like to think she's wherever she is looking on and proud of like how I keep doing that. It's hard to say would it be uncomfortable for her where I'm at in my faith, the conversations I have. I know it's uncomfortable for my dad at times. He listens to some of his podcasts. I'm sure he will have listened to this one. And so, hey.
Hi, Howard.
But even then, he's still like, oh, I don't really get that you had that person you had on the podcast is a bit odd, but like, it's interesting or whatever. So like, even from my dad, he's got space for that. And I think that speaks really well of just how they've always engaged with spirituality, has been very open, even though internally they've lived very convicted of what they believe.
Yeah.
And my family, one of my brothers and my sister are maybe more traditional, a bit more conservative or conventional, but still very open, have a lot of space, have their own questions and doubts and things like that. And then the other one, and his wife, he's been on this podcast, Neil, and his wife Jessie, that they have deconstructed their faith and are kind of figuring it out as they go. And so there's a bit of a mix anyway in the family. So we've kind of like, we don't really go there as much anymore either. Like ever since you've known me, we've not really had very spiritual conversations in our family. I think because my mum was the person that circled around, and ever since you kind of came into that nucleus,
she was very ill, and we just didn't really have those kind of spaces and conversations. And so generally we connect a lot more around a whole host of different things, just where we're at as individuals, life, you know, they've got kids now, a lot of my brothers, and it's just like, it's a different world for everyone. Different conversations happen. Sometimes no conversation happens at all. It's just trying to like deal with the kids.
Chase after the children and your brother.
So it's just lots going on in my family. But we just love each other and do life well. And I've been really lucky as well that really, as far as things go, generally speaking, my family are not the closest people to me. They live 6 hours away, 5.5 hours away. I see them every now and again. I've not even seen them once this year because of COVID, but usually I see them a few times a year. But what has become my family, the closest people to me is this community here in Manchester, and we are really close and we really hold space for each other exactly where we are. We do have the deep conversations and things like that. And so it's not like I can't have those with my family, or I don't want to, or I don't have those conversations. I do. But they're not the go-to support system I have for working out my spirituality and my faith. And that's really what happens in this space with you, with my friends. And so, I'm very lucky in that way. I think so. And even with your family as well, you know, like, I think the fact your family grew up kind of more Baptist, but your parents converted to
Catholicism.
Catholicism. There's quite a mix in your wider family. There's Church of England, kind of Anglican, kind of you know. There's different backgrounds, and I think there's a lot of space for people to be slightly different in their approach. I think it's remarkable. They're so inclusive of me. I think it speaks to my winning charm.
And I think they look too carefully at what you post.
They probably don't look too carefully. Hopefully the fact that you're on this doesn't mean that they watch and suddenly go, oh my gosh. But I think that they've been remarkable as well. And I think part of this is in the UK we're a bit more reserved. We sometimes don't go a lot of places. We sometimes do kind of go, let's not go there because it will be a problem, and we'd rather keep everything smooth and simple. But I think a lot of it as well in the UK and in Europe as a whole is that a lot of our culture has deconstructed in a time where deconstruction wasn't really an option. It just literally was, if you stop being a Christian, you become an atheist or an agnostic. These days it's a bit more complex because we've got this global kind of playing field, and we can have these kind of complex conversations with nuance. But back then, I mean, if you look at the UK, the majority of the UK is atheist now. It's not Christian. And or at least a blend of atheism and agnosticism. And so, like, when we were growing up as kids, most of our friends would have been atheists or agnostic. They probably didn't even think about this kind of stuff. Whereas in America, you grew up, it's still very Christian. There's a lot of Christian kind of components. So families expect Christianity. It's much more of a betrayal of culture, and or at least there's not really a practice of interacting with people with different faith and things like that to that level. Maybe like a Church of Christ guy can talk to a progressive Christian, but we're still all Christian, right? We're still all on the same page. In the UK, I think it was really common, like our parents would have spent a lot of time talking to people that don't have a Christian faith. And so I think on some level, there's a component of we recognize, in America, it fascinates me, but did you know that was it atheists were, they scored as less trustworthy than pedophiles?
Wow.
On a scale of trustworthiness. Isn't that mental? And they were the number one untrustworthy. They were less trustworthy than murderers and rapists as well. It was really, and so it's this mentality of like, well, there's nothing worse than atheists.
Now, so that's totally different.
To us in Europe, we like laugh hysterically because we're like, well, most of the people I know are atheists. And they're really nice people. And so I think as a culture, we have come to a place where people that have different beliefs, if they're not, we think they're wrong and they're idiots. How could they not be Christian? Obviously they're missing the truth. But we don't think of them as bad people, or we don't see it as a deep threat to our existence. Some Christians can be like that, I think. And actually I think it's getting more like that as it becomes a bit more radicalized. But I do think there's different cultural components in that we are very fortunate in this sense to be deconstructing in Europe. Where there's more space for people.
Well, not Europe for much longer.
At least continental. Or not continental, but like geographic. So I think that's all we need to say about family and things like that, I think, right?
Tick.
We're getting through the list.
We're nearly there. Okay, so one person was asking about psilocybin, magic mushrooms.
Magic mushrooms.
Has that helped your deconstruction?
Yeah, I think of course, like with something like this, like it's a really complex conversation. It's a really hard conversation for a lot of Christians because Christians can be so black and white about these kind of things. But I think that for me, the research has been overwhelming around psilocybin. It's just been legalized in like a whole bunch of states in America, and we're really seeing a lot of progress because these are extremely useful tools. They're extremely useful drugs, medicines to help people with anxiety, with depression, coming to end of life, to deal with the concept of I might die. Like, it's incredible seeing the data, I think, coming out of mostly John Hopkins on people that are dying, taking psilocybin and not having a fear of death anymore. The percentage, it's a significant percentage of people that do it, don't fear their death anymore. I would like, if I was dying, to not fear dying, right? I mean, that seems like a great thing to do. And so, like, there's all this stuff coming out about how helpful they are. What's interesting is, and it's not as studied, but actually it's a much older practice, older than all of these, is that psilocybin has been used as early as we know, involved in the practice of spirituality, long before any of our modern religions, Judaism or Christianity or any of these existed. People were using psilocybin and other hallucinogenics as spiritual teachers, things to teach them and allow them to grow. And maybe part of that is interwoven with depression and anxiety and different things. But I think that's a fascinating component that has always kind of intrigued me. And you know me, I don't do anything by halves. And so for me, that's been something like, I want to dive into that. I live with chronic pain, and that's a dynamic in my life that I've navigated. There's huge data on psilocybin being very helpful for chronic pain. I can be anxious and be a bit depressed at times. I definitely struggled with that on and off. And I'm like, wow, great. I would love to explore this. Of course, these things aren't as available everywhere yet, and so like it's not as black and white, and it's not as simple as maybe picking up some meds for, I don't know, period pain. Take an ibuprofen and an aspirin or whatever. We don't have that availability yet, but that is getting there. But for me, psilocybin has been a really helpful teacher when I have taken psilocybin, which I will leave as an exclusively vague, a very obviously vague timeline. But when I have done it, it's been extremely helpful for me. Probably the most significant spiritual moments of my life have been the times I've taken psilocybin. And it has been largely because it has unraveled the way I see things. It's unraveled the stories that I've constructed, and so much meaning has gone into those stories without realizing these are stories I've just kind of agreed with. Maybe I didn't make them up. Maybe society around me's made them up or whatever. But that's a story. Look at my divorce with Sarah, and it's like I have this story that, like, to be successful you have to be married, or if you're divorced people will think you're unsuccessful and won't like you. And I'm like, that's a story that I bought. I maybe even made a lot of that story up, but it's a story. It's just a made up idea. Marriage is a made up idea. Divorce is a made up idea. We just agree on that idea and it becomes a thing. And so when you start to step back from that story and you go, well, is that true? Is it true that if you get divorced, people will like you less? It turns out, actually, people liked me a bit more. Some really conservative Christians sent me some horrible, horrible things. Absolutely, that happened. But the vast majority of people actually lent in. And they were like, gosh, I feel more empathy for you. Gosh, you're more human to me. And I was more open and more vulnerable. I was more broken. It broke me open. And so there's something about when our stories devolve and break apart that psilocybin does so well. And even some of the more profound stories, we talk about deconstruction and losing our spirituality. I mean, these are the kind of story-breaking moments that really change us and profoundly shape us. And what psilocybin does probably better than anything I know, and you can get to these places without medicinal help. You can do it through meditation and contemplation and different things. You can do it through breathing exercises and different things, sensory deprivation. There's all sorts of techniques, and I've done most of those as well because I love trying things. I'm an experimenter. But psilocybin, it kind of just goes, all right, how about I just do this for you with very little interaction on your part? It's very much, it feels like a shortcut in a sense. And I'm not saying that to say that it's a good idea. It can be a really scary shortcut, right? Sometimes the shortcut looks like driving off a cliff. That's the quick way to the bottom. You might not like the trip.
Yeah.
No pun intended there.
So you wouldn't recommend it to everyone then?
Definitely not to everyone. Not at all. I think it's something that people have to research and think about carefully and consider, am I in a place where that's healthy? Because the big story that it has deconstructed for me, probably 3 or 4 times this has happened in different ways. And sometimes it's been profound and wonderful and quite light. But that was, I think, once. I think the other times it was utterly terrifying, is breaking apart the story of who is Phil and what is this thing that you're calling Phil, and what is this idea that you are a person, you are a thing, like you this is just an idea that we grab onto and we give credibility to, and so this is what they talk about with ego death. Richard Rohr talks about this as the second journey of life. He talks about the first journey of life is we start as babies don't have an ego, they don't know they're a thing, and they don't know anyone else is a thing, and it's only over time they become a thing and you become something separate. And over time, we grow this concept of Phil or Tilly, and we grow that. And then at some point, we start to realize, what the hell am I doing? What the fuck is this? And is this even a story I want to be a part of? And so in the second half of life, we start to take that story apart and reevaluate, who am I and what am I about and what do I want to be doing in this world and what purpose do I have and do I believe the stories around me and the culture around me? And that's the story of deconstruction. Big shout out to the book Falling Upwards if people are wanting to read about
Richard
that journey.
Rohr,
It's great. It's also good for if you want to go to sleep, right? You found the audiobook very helpful. Sorry, Richard, if you're listening to this, but Tilly loves your voice.
He has a very soothing voice. It's also a very profound message, but yeah, good
I remember you saying, I really want to get into this book and I'm trying and it's so good. But every time I listen to it, I just fall. To be fair, you listen to audiobooks at night, don't you? So probably a bad time to listen to Richard Rohr. He's just got he's got a bedtime story voice, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Richard Rohr would read me to sleep every night. I'd be very happy. But Falling Upward is great for that because it talks about that journey. But so psilocybin, I think, can be a great teacher. It's a tool. And it's for people in a certain place trying to do a certain thing, I think, generally speaking. But I do think, looking forward, I think these could be amazing tools for us. And I think historically, they are used around the world as spiritual teachers. Very many witch doctors, shamans, spiritual leaders in different parts of the world will use hallucinogenics as a tool, ayahuascas and DMTs and magic mushrooms and things like that. They'll use as a tool to take people on a spiritual journey. And we were watching a documentary about people that were suffering with anxiety and depression and different things. And they went to the Netherlands where it's completely legal. And there was a person there that basically...
It's like a retreat, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was it sounded great. And they would sit with you and they'd say, where are you at? Where are you stuck in life? What are you wanting to work on? What are you doing? And they would think, okay, based on that, we're going to give you this dosage. And then we're going to set you up with certain rituals to prepare yourself with, meditate, contemplate this. And as you go through it, we're going to come and check on you and maybe guide you a bit and give you a nudge in this direction or that direction. I can see this being for the right person at the right time. As this becomes more legal in more places, I could see this being an amazing retreat opportunity for people that are deconstructing, to have wise teachers, almost the shamans of the deconstruction, maybe more mystical components of the deconstruction journey, sitting with people and going, what are your story? What are you deconstructing? Where are you trying to go? What do you feel is next for you? And then taking them on a journey, an assisted journey. Because we go to therapy for it, right? And actually in the 50s, this is how they used psilocybin, is they used it in therapy. They gave people psilocybin, and it lasts about 6 hours, most people, and they would sit with a therapist, and the therapist would talk them through their issues. We saw another documentary about this, actually, and it was profound. It's really profound, the changes in people. And they sat with a therapist for 6 hours, and the therapist talked them through a childhood memory and different things. And because what it does is psilocybin, it basically activates neurons and allows neural pathways to grow and to connect. And so what happens is, as you're on psilocybin, you can rewire the brain, quite literally. And so if you've got defaults and habits and things and ways of seeing things, that's why they see things like depression, anxiety. They're holes that you kind of get into because the brain starts turning a pathway into a highway, right? You go from a little back road into a 17-lane interchange. But what's beautiful is that can take years to kind of overcome and change. But it can almost change in an instant with a tool like psilocybin, because what it does is it goes, we could just rewire. Let's change that route to do this one instead.
And if you've got someone who's like, you know, clinically depressed, like that's huge. Like to just suddenly be able to give them a whole new kind of lease of life.
Yeah, it makes me really excited about the future. I think we get really bogged down about the state of the world and how people are and the state where people are. And I think
mental
depression
health,
is a huge issue right now, but I think it's always been a huge issue. I think we're just giving people space to have mental health.
Yeah.
You know, you look at how many people were on like Prozac and stuff in the 50s. All the housewives were like off their face on drugs because they were so depressed. And, you know, we forget like a lot of our history. And I think a lot of it now is we're just allowing people to talk. We're allowing men to have emotions. Well, no surprise that the men are suddenly going, I feel very emotional and I feel like a bit broken and undervalued and, you know, I don't know what's going on. And, oh, is it possible that men felt like this for most of history? You know, like, of course these things are going to start coming up, but I feel like that's spurring us to start engaging with new tools and things. And very natural and healthy, and there's very few side effects actually as well. There's obviously are side effects and there's things to to consider, but generally speaking, a very, very safe tool.
Yeah.
So yes, psilocybin has been very helpful for me on my journey. I don't recommend that people do it lightly, but I do recommend people think about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, especially if you are feeling like that's an area that you're really wanting to engage with, the engaging with trying to kill some of your ego, to try and disconnect some of that story and see what's lying under that's a profound thing. And certainly things like fear of death, we talked about that, like that has been profoundly impacted because of my experiences of psilocybin, like things like what I consider myself to be in consciousness, and it's been profoundly impacted. So it's been very important for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All
right.
We're
wrapping
last
up, are we?
question. People wanting to know where you're at now. Like what do you believe? What's next for you in your spiritual journey?
Am I a Christian? Give me a label, right? That's basically what people want. They want like, are you a Christian? Are you an atheist?
I don't know. Maybe it's because they want to know how to label themselves or what to say to other people. You know, it's not necessarily like a intrusive question.
No. I don't mean that either. I just think it's just so much easier when we look at someone and we go, like,
put them in a
you're
box.
That. Like, I think it helps us feel safe when we look at someone to go, what is this? Right? I look at a spider and I go, poisonous, not poisonous. Yeah. That's my first question. Right. To be honest with you, I look at a spider and I just think, I'm out of here. Right? That's my first. But you know, we to be able to categorize things helps us understand things and feel safe, and so it's natural and normal. Yeah. But I do think it's really problematic a lot of the time because we come from a world where we do have lots of ins and outs and black and whites, and I think that can drive us as we continue, and we still look for these kind of nice, clear-cut labels. But if we're honest and we say, okay, what does being a Christian mean to your grandma? And is that the same thing as what being a Christian means to your best friend? And is that the same thing as what a Christian means to the Westboro Baptist Church? Yeah. Now put these three people in the room and they all say, I'm a Christian. Yeah. Do they all nod in agreement? Yeah. And also, if you say you're a Christian as a Westboro Baptist Church person in a general church, most people are like, oh yeah, great, cool. Guess what? I reckon they're going to be about 30 minutes in and this is going to turn really sour really fast, right? Because you had one idea and an expectation and you build a story around that person and suddenly that story just dissolves when they go, yeah, of course though, we got to go like picket that funeral of that gay person because gay people are the worst people on the planet. And you're like, whoa, that changed. That's really not what I was expecting from you because I didn't think Christians were like that. Maybe you do think Christians are like that. But the point being, labels are really problematic because if I say, yes, I am a Christian, that's a big problem for the vast majority of Christians. And so that's why I don't say that. In many ways, I am a Christian. I grew up a Christian. I have evolved from being a Christian, and being Christian is very much still a part of who I am. Like in the same way that being Scottish is the same part of who I am, and I'm not living in Scotland anymore. Right. Like these are parts of who I am and who I've become, and much of the way I frame the world and see the world comes from that tradition and comes from that perspective. But I'm not limited to that by any stretch of the imagination. I feed from Buddhism and Taoism, and I read, Islam poet like Rumi, or, I want to feed from it. I read atheists all the time because I'm like, gosh, they have an amazing way of framing the world and understanding and providing meaning and purpose without necessarily having a God in the sky going, this is your meaning and purpose. Like, I love that stuff. And I think it's really important that we can let go of some of these black and white dualisms, and let people be a little bit more gray, be a little bit more nuanced. So what do I believe? I believe that this is a really complex thing going on. Like, I don't think many of us have got it nailed down, and I'm pretty sure that anyone that thinks they've got it nailed down is probably wrong, because so far that has been the case.
Yeah.
There's no one that's got this nailed down. Whether it's from a spiritual perspective, a philosophical perspective, a psychological perspective, a scientific, chemical perspective. I mean, any area where we're like, oh, we're done, we start looking a bit closer and it gets completely turned on its head. Even just from the scientific community, like, we think we're closer and closer to getting things done, and then we split an atom and go, holy shit, how many layers can we do this? And we start splitting and splitting and splitting, and before long, we're like, okay, now we have multi-world theory, and we've got like, we're teleporting like particles, subatomic particles, and we're like, what the hell is happening? And we don't fully have many answers for a lot. We just have a ton of theories. We've got, for every new answer we provide, it creates 10, 20, 30 questions. And so I think we're in a space where there's so much mystery and beauty, and I think that it's fun to engage with that. It's beautiful to hold on that open-handed. I think science answers a vast quantity of things that mysticism and spirituality answered before. So yes, you won't find many people worshipping the sun god anymore. But we did like 4,000 years ago, because we didn't know where the hell the sun went. And the sun is important. So we worship the sun god.
Yeah.
Because we need that sun to come back tomorrow. Right? So, but that doesn't happen anymore. Why? Because now we know where the sun goes. The other side of the world. The world just spun. The sun didn't even move. Well, it's kind of spiraling through the universe. But, as we grow, as we develop, Jesus deals with the epileptic kid who's falling over and foaming at the mouth and shaking. Maybe not epilepsy, but some sort of seizures and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that was called a demon. And he was like, yeah, I'll cast that demon out for you. And he healed the kid, right? Now, was it a demon? I don't know. Maybe it was epilepsy. Sounds like some sort of seizure. But in that world, they didn't have doctors. So demon might be the right word for that, when you don't even know what a doctor is. You don't even know what medicine is. You don't have those. Now, if that person brought their kid into the ER and a kid falls over and says, my kid keeps falling over and shaking and foaming at the mouth, they'd be like, Jesus, get this guy to a neurologist and we'll get him some epilepsy medicine, and we probably can get this in control. If we can't heal it, maybe. I mean, the fact that Jesus healed this guy is amazing. Let's not. So the thing is, it doesn't matter what we call it. These miraculous, incredible things happen. It's like when we're talking about Bethel, like, holy crap, these things are crazy. They're amazing. And we don't necessarily have answers for everything. Some things we'll be able to answer. And in time, I think a lot of these things will continue to answer. So we now have an answer to what that kid had. And maybe we even have a very rudimentary answer of how we might fix it. Long term, we might even be able to cure epilepsy like that. Maybe we give us some sort of injection and it does some sort of change to their DNA, or I don't know, and it cures epilepsy. Maybe. But right now we can't. And even if we do, that's a miraculous, beautiful, astonishing thing. But I do think that the universe is moving in a direction. I think I love Rob Bell's stuff on this, of everything is spiritual. I really recommend people watch his stuff on YouTube. I think they're both on YouTube. He's got 2 videos on that, and he's got a great book on it. But we are moving from chaos to order, from violence to love, from exclusion to inclusion. The whole universe is moving in this direction. The world is getting better and better and better. And we are getting more and more answers, and we're getting more and more wise. And yet with every new answer and with all of our new wisdom, we are left astonished and in wonder and mystified. And I think that's exciting and that's beautiful. And we don't have the answers to what is consciousness? What are we? How is this happening? Even some things like, I believe in evolution. That's not hard for me. I don't think it's very hard for most people in Europe, even Christians. I think a lot of Christians believe in evolution. It's a huge thing for Christians in America. But I don't really believe in evolution sheerly by random chance. I feel that there's some of these new concepts of evolution, punctuated evolution, quantum evolution, because the data is that yes, while random evolution could happen, it's really, really statistically unlikely. Like beyond statistically,
Right.
like there's not a number big enough for the
Okay.
odds of like, you know, us getting from like nothing
Yeah.
to this.
Yeah.
Now, of course, yes, and that's why this isn't here anywhere else. It's only here, right?
Yeah.
And so, of course,
Yeah.
it's rare
That's
because
how
you know
statistics
we're
work,
the
yeah.
rare person. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, that's amazing. What are the odds of me being me? And there's no
Yeah.
other Phil Drysdales in the world, and
Yeah.
here he is right here.
Yeah.
Like, of course.
Yeah.
So there, of course, is part of that, but there is I feel there's a direction, a push. There's a reason that we keep moving in a healthy way, in a beautiful way. And I think there's a direction to this. I don't know if you could call that God. You can call it reality. You could call it the ground of being. You could call it the universe. Whatever we call it. I don't know. I don't know the answers, and I'm not going to pretend to know the answers. I'm not going to pretend to label it with one specific words and go, oh yeah, this is Christianity. This is Buddhism. I think all of these traditions have been engaging with this idea and asking questions and coming up with new ideas. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that's a good thing. And I think we should be feeding on all of these things and exploring and figuring out what makes sense to us and how does it help us engage with the world and with the people around us and with ourselves the best. To me, I don't mind where people end up. I don't mind what works for them now because I know what worked for me last week doesn't work for me right now.
Yeah.
Like, we're constantly growing and evolving. So why get so hung up on people finding the right thing to be and labeling it the right way when they're not going to be like that in 10 years now anyway? And so if I'm fixated on people believing what I believe today, well, I failed miserably if they listen to this podcast 2 years from now, because I'm not going to be this person. And so I think we have to be a little bit less tight-fisted over what we believe and how we're growing. I think we have to be more open to the fact that we are answering things that dissolve mystery, and that's very real. The things that were mysterious 2,000 years ago are no longer mysterious. But we also have to look ahead with wonder and go, but there's so much new mystery opening up in front of us, and that's so exciting. And we don't have the answers for those things. And maybe we will. Maybe we keep doing that. Like, maybe there is a reductionist component of we just can always figure this out. But we haven't yet. And so I think there's always space for, even if this has a definitive answer, right? Even if there's a scientific reason or answer to how Jesus healed that epileptic kid, doesn't really change the fact that it's amazing. It's beautiful. It's a miracle. It's love in action. It's compassion. It's empathy. It's wonderful. You know, even if you can even ask just simple questions like, what is love, right? I mean, ask 100 people what love is and they'll give you different answers. And even in the scientific community, different people will explain that differently. And even if one day we can bottle it up, we can go, okay, so it's this much cortisol, it's this much, adrenaline, it's this much, like, that's what love is. It's just hormones bouncing around in your body with the right thoughts, and there you go, you've got love. Even if we can do that, it's a really amazing thing. And what a beautiful thing, and what a profound thing, and what a astonishing thing. I think we don't want to lose wonder just because we can explain something, or just because we have managed to reduce it down to some chemical formula. And so for me, the world and the universe is still miraculous and beautiful and exciting. And I think there's just so much ahead. Why try and remove all of that? I'm constantly seeking out truth and answers, and I'm always doing that. But it's from a joy, and it's from the joy of the journey, and it's from the joy of knowing with every new answer, I end up with 2 more questions. It's like watching Lost, right? You never get more. You never get resolved.
Yeah.
You're like, even the season finale, right? You're like, okay, we're down to 5,000 questions. How are they going to answer it? Even if they answer the 5,000 questions, you're probably going to come away with a few answers, questions. And so, but that's the fun of it. I actually love that, and I think that's the way good TV should be like that. TV that doesn't resolve at the end is good TV, because it's engaging, it's real, it's it draws you in the way that life draws you in. The happily ever after is kind of a boring end because you're like, well, what happened after that?
I disagree. I like it.
I know.
I like a nice.
Well, you're the person that pauses
happy
movies
ending.
before they end
Yeah.
if you know the ending's going to be bad.
Yeah, I need that.
That's so funny. That is so funny.
I think we've done it, babe.
Anything to add?
No.
You're good. You're like, we've
I'm
done this
good.
twice. Oh, well, good job, everyone that hung in.
Yeah, I'm very impressed that we made it to the end.
Especially to Tilly, who hung in right through. That we've done this for about 6 hours today.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we did it. Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll have you back on as well. I'm sure people will want to hear more from Tilly because you have only so much to say when it is let's tell Phil's journey. Because people have asked me again and again, where can I get your journey? Where can I get your story? And so the idea behind this is just to kind of create a dump for people where I can just immediately go, you want my story? This is a podcast 100.
Yeah.
Just whack the microphone. Yeah, that's been a soft entry for you as well because it didn't require too much conversation on your part. But we'll do another podcast which requires a bit more conversation. All right. Wonderful. Love you all. And I'll see you again for another episode. And you'll see her again.